When Lewis Hamilton's phone rang that quiet morning in Monaco, he had no idea his entire world was about to change. The voice on the other end delivered news that made his heart stop. Carmen Rodriguez, the woman who had raised him, who had fed him empanadas after school, who had believed in him when no one else did, was gone. But that wasn't the only shock waiting for him. The lawyer said Carmen had left something for him in her will, something so important that Lewis had to come to England immediately. Something he had to see with his own eyes. The lawyer wouldn't say what it was over the phone. He just kept repeating, "She made very specific arrangements, Mr. Hamilton. You need to come alone." Lewis canceled everything and flew home. When he arrived at the lawyer's office, he was handed an old shoebox held together with rubber bands. Inside were newspaper clippings from every race he'd ever driven. Ticket stubs proving Carmen had attended every single British Grand Prix, sitting in the cheapest seats so he'd never know she was there. A photograph of 7-year-old Lewis asleep on her couch, safe and loved. And a key. A mysterious key attached to a keychain shaped like a racing helmet. The lawyer slid a piece of paper across the desk with an address Lewis had never heard of. "Mrs. Rodriguez purchased something 18 months ago," he explained. "She spent her entire life savings preparing it for you. But you must go there yourself. You must see it alone. She said you'd understand once you opened the door." Lewis drove 90 minutes north, his hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to imagine what Carmen could have possibly left him. When he finally arrived at the address, what he found waiting behind that door was so unexpected, so impossible, so full of love and sacrifice, that it brought this 7-time world champion to his knees in tears. What did Carmen leave for Lewis Hamilton? What was hidden in that cottage that made a man who'd won everything break down and cry? And what was the incomplete sentence in Carmen's final letter? The sentence that would change how Lewis saw his entire life. Watch the full story to discover the gift that changed everything. The gift that taught a champion how to fly. And, more importantly, how to land. Lewis Hamilton stood in his Monaco apartment, staring at the Mediterranean Sea through floor-to-ceiling windows. The water sparkled like diamonds under the morning sun. In 3 weeks, the new racing season would begin. To buzzed on the marble counter. Unknown buzzed on the marble counter. Unknown number. British area code. Stevenage. Lewis frowned. Nobody from his hometown called anymore. Everyone he needed to reach had his private number. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. "Hello? Mr. Hamilton, this is Richard Pemberton. I'm a solicitor calling from Stevenage." The voice was formal, careful. "I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, but I'm calling about Carmen Rodriguez." Lewis's stomach dropped. His hand gripped the phone tighter. "Carmen? Is she okay?" Silence stretched across the line. Lewis heard papers shuffling in the background. "I'm very sorry to inform you that Mrs. Rodriguez passed away 3 days ago. Peacefully, in her sleep. On her heart," the doctors said. The words hit Lewis like a wall. The phone nearly slipped from his hand. He stumbled backward, finding the edge of his leather sofa. His throat closed up. "No," he whispered. "No, that can't. I just sent her a Christmas card." She sent one back. She drew a little race car on it. She always draws the race car. "I understand this is difficult," Mr. Pemberton said gently. "Mrs. Rodriguez spoke of you often. You were very dear to her." Lewis couldn't breathe properly. Carmen. Mama Carmen. The woman who had raised him from age 3 to 12. Who had fed him after school when his dad worked late. Who had believed in him when everyone else said a black kid from a council estate couldn't become a Formula One driver. When was the last time he'd actually seen her? 2 years ago? 3? He'd meant to visit. And he'd kept meaning to visit. But there was always another race, another sponsor event, another commitment. Mr. Hamilton? Are you still there? Yes. Sorry. Yes, I'm here. Louis wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. When's the funeral? Saturday, 10 o'clock, at St. Mary's in Stevenage. But that's not why I'm calling. Papers rustled again. Mrs. Rodriguez left a will. A very specific will. There's something she left for you. Louis closed his eyes. I don't want her money. Whatever she had, give it to charity. It's not about money, Mr. Hamilton. Or rather, it's not just about that. Mrs. Rodriguez left you something else, something she was very particular about. I can't discuss the details over the phone. You need to come to Stevenage. You need to come in person. I don't understand. Well, why can't you just tell me? Because those were her explicit instructions. You must come to my office. You must come alone. And... Mr. Pemberton paused. There's a time limit. You must come within 1 week before the funeral, or the inheritance passes to her secondary beneficiaries. Louis stood up, pacing toward the window. A yacht drifted past below, carrying people who had nothing better to do than float in the sunshine. He'd bought his father a yacht. He'd bought his brother a house. He'd bought himself 3 homes he barely lived in. But he'd never bought Carmen the house in Spain she'd always dreamed about. He'd promised her once, years ago. Then life had gotten busy. The promise had faded into the background noise of his success. Mr. Hamilton? I'll be there tomorrow, Louis said, his voice rough. To send me your office address. Of course. And Mr. Hamilton? Mrs. Rodriguez asked me to tell you something if you agreed to come. She said to tell you that you shouldn't feel guilty. She said you'd understand when you arrived. Louis's eyes burned with tears. Even in death, Carmen knew him. She knew the guilt would eat him alive. Thank you for calling, Louis managed to say. He ended the call and stood motionless, staring at the sea without seeing it. His phone buzzed again, his trainer, asking about tomorrow's session. Louis ignored it. Carmen was gone. The woman who had wiped his tears after racist taunts at karting events. Who had taught him Spanish curse words when he was angry. Who had made him empanadas every Friday without fail. Who had told him, over and over, that he was destined for greatness, not because of his speed, but because of his heart. And he hadn't been there. He hadn't even known she was sick. Louis walked to his bedroom, pulled out his suitcase, and began to pack. Whatever Carmen had left him, whatever mysterious inheritance required his presence, he would honor her final request. It was the least he could do. It was far less than she deserved. Louis remembered the first time he met Carmen Rodriguez. He was 6 years old, sitting on the concrete steps outside his council flat, knees pulled to his chest. His father was 3 hours late picking him up from school. Again. The door 3 houses down had opened, and a woman with dark curly hair and kind eyes had stepped out. She wore a yellow apron covered in flour. "Niño, how long have you been sitting there?" Louis had shrugged, trying not to cry. Big boys didn't cry. Racing drivers didn't cry. "Just come," she'd said, holding out her hand. "You wait inside. I just made empanadas. You like empanadas?" He hadn't known what empanadas were, but he'd taken her hand anyway. Carmen's tiny flat had smelled like heaven, warm spices and butter and something sweet he couldn't name. She'd sat him at her small kitchen table and placed a golden pastry on a plate in front of him. When he'd bitten into it, the flavors had exploded in his mouth. "Good, yes?" Carmen had smiled, her whole face lighting up. Lewis had nodded, his mouth too full to speak properly. When Anthony Hamilton had finally arrived 4 hours later, panicked and apologetic, he'd found his son asleep on Carmen's floral couch, belly full, face peaceful. "I'm so sorry," Anthony had said, standing in her doorway. "The bus broke down, then my shift ran over." "And? Stop apologizing," Carmen had interrupted. "I have nothing but time. Lewis, he can stay here after school, however long you need." "I can't pay much," Anthony had admitted, exhausted. "Maybe £10 a week?" Carmen had waved her hand dismissively. "Whatever you can manage. The boy shouldn't sit on cold steps." That's how it had started. Carmen Rodriguez, a widow who'd immigrated from Cuba 30 years earlier, became Lewis's second mother. Not through agencies or contracts, but through empanadas and kindness. The memories flooded back as Lewis's plane touched down at London Luton Airport. He rented a car, something small and anonymous, not the sports cars people expected, and drove toward Stevenage through gray English drizzle. He remembered being 7, crying in Carmen's kitchen after his first big karting race, and he'd finished 5th. The winner's father had walked past and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Shame they let anyone race these days. Standards are dropping." Lewis had known what the man meant. He was the only black kid in the entire competition. Carmen had found him an hour later, hiding behind the snack tent, tears streaming down his face. "Mijo," she'd said softly, kneeling in the mud in her good church dress. "Look at me." He'd looked up, hiccuping. "Those people, they're afraid." "Afraid of what?" "I'm just a kid." "Afraid of what you'll become," Carmen had said fiercely. "You have a gift, Lewis. Not just the speed. Anyone can go fast if they're stupid enough. Your gift is that you'll prove them wrong while refusing to become bitter like them. That's the real victory. You understand?" He hadn't understood then. He'd been 7. Nah, but he'd nodded anyway because Carmen believed it, and Carmen never lied. Lewis turned onto the familiar streets of his childhood estate. Everything looked smaller now, shabbier. The corner shop where he'd bought candy had closed. The playground where he'd practiced his reflexes was rusty and forgotten. He drove past his old primary school, the place where the headmaster, Mr. Thornberry, had called his father in for a meeting when Lewis was 10. Lewis had sat outside the office, swinging his legs, while the adults talked inside. But the door hadn't been fully closed. He'd heard everything. "Mr. Hamilton, I'm concerned about Lewis's focus on this racing hobby. His grades are fine, but he could be excellent if he applied himself. Oh, I think it's time to consider more realistic career paths." "Realistic?" His father's voice had been tight, with barely controlled anger. "Motor racing is extraordinarily expensive. The odds of success are—" "My son will race," Anthony had interrupted. "And he'll succeed. We didn't come this far to quit, because you lack imagination." Carmen had been at that meeting too, uninvited but present. Lewis had heard her voice next. "Mr. Thornberry, with respect, you're scared. Scared because Lewis doesn't fit in your little box of what's possible for a boy from this estate. But I've seen that boy's face when he drives. I've seen his focus. You teach history? Then you should know. History gets made by people everyone said couldn't do it." Lewis had loved her even more that day. Now, driving past that same school, Lewis felt the weight of her absence crush his chest. He pulled over, gripping the steering wheel, breathing hard. Carmen had been at every local karting race, every single one. She'd stood in the rain, in the cold, in the blistering summer heat, cheering louder than anyone. When other parents had complained about the noise, about the rough element at the tracks, Carmen had stood taller and cheered even louder. When Louis was 11, he'd asked her, "Why do you come to all my races? Don't you get bored?" Carmen had been packing empanadas into a cooler for that afternoon's event. She'd stopped, turned to him, and cupped his face in her flour-dusted hands. "Louis, mi amor, I come because I get to watch a miracle. You think miracles are boring?" "I'm not a miracle," he'd mumbled, embarrassed. "I'm just fast." "You're a Cuban widow's answered prayer," she'd said. "My Eduardo and I, we couldn't have children. My body wouldn't cooperate. Then God sends me you, this beautiful, determined, impossible boy. So no, mijo, I don't get bored. I get blessed." Louis had hugged her then, tight, pressing his face into her shoulder. "When I'm world champion," he'd promised, "I'm buying you that house in Spain you always talk about. The one near where your husband grew up, with the orange trees." Carmen had kissed the top of his head. "You already gave me everything, Louis. But I'll take the orange trees, if you're offering." Louis sat in the parked car, watching rain streak down the windshield. That promise echoed in his head. "When I'm world champion, I'm buying you that house in Spain." He'd become world champion 7 times, and he'd earned hundreds of millions of pounds. He owned properties in 3 countries, and Carmen had died in the same council flat where she'd first fed him empanadas 29 years ago. The house in Spain had never materialized. He'd meant to do it. He'd really meant to. But seasons blurred together. Years vanished. The promise became one of those things he'd get to eventually. Except eventually had run out. Louis started the car again, his vision blurred with tears, and drove toward Mr. Pemberton's office. Whatever Carmen had left him, whatever this mysterious inheritance was, he already knew the truth. He didn't deserve it. He didn't deserve her. But he'd go anyway, because Carmen had asked. And even in death, he couldn't refuse her. Louis drove past Carmen's old house without meaning to. His hands turned the wheel automatically, a muscle memory pulling him down Hatherley Road like a magnet. Number 47. The yellow door was gone. He parked across the street, engine idling, staring at the small terraced house that had been his second home for 9 years. The new owners had painted the door gray. Gray. Carmen would have hated that. She'd painted it sunshine yellow when Louis was 8, saying, "Every home should smile at its guests." The garden looked neglected. The rose bushes Carmen had tended every Sunday morning were overgrown and wild. The small bird bath where she'd left water for the sparrows was cracked and filled with dead leaves. Louis's chest tightened. Had she been too weak to garden in her final years? Had she needed help? Had she asked for help? Had he been too busy winning trophies to notice she was fading? He closed his eyes, but that only made the memories stronger. 12 years ago. Louis had just signed with Mercedes, the contract that would change everything. Millions of pounds, global recognition, everything he'd sacrificed for, finally within reach. Carmen had insisted on cooking dinner to celebrate. Not at some fancy restaurant. Louis had offered to take her anywhere she wanted, but at her house, at her table, with her food. "Mijo, I don't need fancy," she'd said on the phone. "I need to feed you properly before you become too important for my cooking." "I'll never be too important for your cooking, Mama Carmen." She'd laughed, that musical laugh of hers. "We'll see. Come Saturday, 6 o'clock, and bring your appetite." Louis had arrived with flowers and a bottle of expensive wine he wasn't sure she'd like. "Shall we drink the grape juice I bought on? We drink the grape juice I bought on sale." Dinner had been perfect. Ropa vieja, black beans, sweet plantains, and rice that somehow tasted better than anything served in Michelin-starred restaurants. Louis had eaten 3 helpings while Carmen watched with satisfaction. Afterward, they'd sat on her floral couch, the same one he'd fallen asleep on as a child, drinking Café Cubano from tiny cups. "Mama Carmen," Louis had said, feeling full and content and grateful. "I need to tell you something." "You're getting married," she'd guessed, eyes twinkling. "No, nothing like that." He'd laughed. "But I made a promise when I was 11. Remember?" Carmen had tilted her head, waiting. I promised when I became world champion, I'd buy you a house in Spain, near Eduardo's village, with orange trees." Her expression had softened. "Louis, you don't need to." "I haven't won the championship yet," he'd interrupted. "But I will. And when I do, first thing, I'm buying you that house. You've given me everything. Let me give you this, please." Carmen had reached over and patted his hand. Her palm was rough from years of cleaning houses, cooking, working. But her touch was gentle. "Okay, mijo, when you win your first championship, but only if you promise me something too. Anything. Promise me you won't forget who you are. All this success, all this money, it changes people. Promise me you'll stay Louis, my Louis, the boy who cried in my kitchen and learned to be strong without being hard." "I promise," he'd said, meaning it completely. Carmen had smiled. "Then I'll wait for my Spanish house. But Louis, you've already given me everything that matters. The house is just dessert." Louis opened his eyes, staring at the gray door across the street. Rain had started falling harder, drumming against the car roof. He'd won his first championship 8 months later. November 2014. Abu Dhabi. The moment he'd dreamed about since he was 6 years old. The celebration had been chaos. Champagne and cameras and people screaming his name. His team lifting him on their shoulders. His father crying with pride. The world exploding in joy and noise and triumph. Somewhere in that madness, Louis remembered telling someone, his manager maybe, to send Carmen money for the Spanish house. He'd been so sure he'd told someone to handle it. But had he? Or had he just thought about it while drowning in champagne and exhaustion? The days after the championship had blurred together. Sponsor appearances, press conferences, award ceremonies, flying between countries, barely sleeping, the machine of fame consuming every minute. When had he last talked to Carmen after that win? Called her? Visited her? The answer made him feel sick. He'd sent a Christmas card that year, and the year after, and the year after that. Carmen had always sent one back, with her shaky handwriting and her little drawings. But visits, real conversations? Those had become, "I'll do it next month," promises that stretched into years. 7 championships. 7 times he could have fulfilled that promise. 7 times he'd been too busy, too tired, too consumed by his own life to remember the woman who'd made that life possible. Louis gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His phone buzzed. A text from his trainer. "Mate, you disappeared. Everything okay?" No. Nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. Louis didn't respond. He put the car in gear and drove away from Carmen's house, her former house, toward the address Mr. Pemberton had sent. The solicitor's office was above a betting shop on the high street, reached by a narrow staircase that smelled like damp carpet and regret. Louis climbed slowly, his legs heavy. Mr. Pemberton's door had a frosted glass window with his name painted in old-fashioned letters. Louis knocked. "Come in!" The office was small and crowded with filing cabinets. Mr. Pemberton sat behind an ancient wooden desk covered in papers. He was maybe 60, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood immediately when Lewis entered. "Mr. Hamilton, thank you for coming so quickly." They shook hands. Mr. Pemberton gestured to a chair. "Can I get you tea? Coffee?" "No, thank you." Lewis sat, his body tense. "You said Carmen left something for me?" Mr. Pemberton nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Before we get to that, I should tell you about her estate. It's modest. £47,000 in savings. She'd sold most of her belongings in the last year. Furniture, jewelry, everything except a few personal items. The money from those sales went into her account." Lewis felt something crack inside his chest. Carmen had been selling her belongings? Why? Had she needed money? Why hadn't she asked him? "Nah, she left most of the money to various charities," Mr. Pemberton continued. "But there's a special bequest for you. Not the money, something else." He reached under his desk and pulled out an old shoebox, the kind that had once held cheap trainers. It was worn at the corners, held together with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. Mr. Pemberton placed it carefully on the desk between them. "Mrs. Rodriguez was very specific. You must receive this in person. And—" He paused, pulling out a sealed envelope. "She left instructions. You're to visit a specific address after you've looked through the box, alone, before the funeral. The address is inside this envelope, along with a key." Lewis stared at the shoebox. His hands trembled as he reached for it. "What's at the address?" "She didn't tell me," Mr. Pemberton said gently. "She said you'd understand when you arrived. She said it was time you received what she'd been saving for you all along." Lewis pulled the box toward him, feeling the weight of it. Inside could be anything. Photos, letters, some small treasures Carmen had kept. Whatever it was, it wouldn't be enough. It couldn't be enough. Nothing could replace the years he'd wasted, the visits he'd postponed, the promise he'd forgotten. But it was all he had left of her now. All he had left of the woman who'd loved him when he was nobody, and who'd died while he was busy being somebody. Lewis pulled the rubber bands off the shoebox. They snapped, brittle from age. His fingers hesitated on the lid. "Take your time," Mr. Pemberton said softly. "I'll step out if you'd like privacy." "No, stay, please." Lewis didn't want to be alone for this. When he lifted the lid, the smell hit him first. Lavender and old paper. Carmen's smell. She'd always kept lavender sachets in her drawers, said it reminded her of Cuba. Lewis's eyes burned. Inside, the box was packed carefully. On top lay a stack of newspaper clippings, yellowed and fragile. Lewis lifted them gently. The first one was from a local Stevenage paper, dated 1998. "Young racer shows promise." There was a tiny photo of 8-year-old Lewis holding a trophy, gap-toothed and grinning. Carmen had circled his face with red pen and written in the margin, "My boy, watch this one." Lewis's throat closed up. The next clipping was from 2001, then 2003, then 2007. Every race, every achievement, every article written about him, Carmen had saved them all. But not just the victories. She'd kept the articles about crashes, too. About setbacks, but about the races he'd rather forget. On a clipping about his 2011 collision with Felipe Massa, Carmen had written, "Rough day, but he'll come back stronger. He always does." Lewis pressed his palm against his eyes, trying not to break down completely. Beneath the newspaper clippings were ticket stubs, dozens of them. Lewis spread them out on the desk, his hands shaking. British Grand Prix, Silverstone. Every single year from 2007 to 2023. 16 tickets. She went to all of them, Lewis whispered. I never knew. I never saw her there. Mr. Pemberton leaned forward slightly. The tickets are all for general admission, the cheap seats. She told me once she preferred it that way. Said she didn't want to be a distraction. Didn't want you worrying about her when you should be focused on racing. Lewis picked up a ticket stub from 2019. So that had been a difficult race. He'd finished third, frustrated with the car's performance. Afterward, he'd done his media obligations and left quickly, eager to escape. Carmen had been there. Somewhere in those massive grandstands, she'd been watching, cheering, believing in him. And he'd never known. Why didn't she tell me? His voice cracked. I think she wanted to support you without adding pressure, Mr. Pemberton said gently. She was very proud of you, talked about you constantly, but she never wanted to be a burden. The word burden hit Lewis like a punch. Carmen had thought she'd be a burden. The woman who'd raised him, fed him, believed in him. She'd thought her presence would be unwelcome. What kind of person had he become? Lewis dug deeper into the box. His fingers touched something glossy. A photograph. And he pulled it out and immediately felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. The photo showed Lewis at maybe 7 years old, asleep on Carmen's floral couch. His small body was curled up, one hand clutching the edge of Carmen's cardigan. She was sitting beside him, looking down at his sleeping face with an expression of such pure love that Lewis couldn't breathe. He didn't remember this moment, didn't remember falling asleep. But the photo captured everything. The safety he'd felt with her, the unconditional acceptance, the home she'd created for a lonely little boy. Lewis turned the photo over. Carmen's handwriting on the back. My greatest blessing, September 2000. He pressed the photo to his chest, rocking slightly in the chair. Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat gently. There's one more thing in the box. Lewis looked down. An envelope, sealed with tape that had turned brown. His name written across it in Carmen's distinctive script, the letters shaky but determined. His hands trembled so badly he could barely open it. Inside, 2 sheets of paper covered in Carmen's handwriting. Lewis unfolded them carefully. My dearest Lewis, it began, if you're reading this, I've finally gone to dance with my Eduardo again. Don't you dare cry for too long. You have races to win, mi campeón. By now, Mr. Pemberton has probably told you about my modest savings. I hope you're not upset that I left most of it to charity. You don't need my money, and those organizations do good work for children like you once were. But there's something else, something I've been preparing for you for a long time now. Mr. Pemberton has a key and an address. You must go there, Lewis. You must go alone, before my funeral. This is not a request. It's my final wish. I know you, mijo. I know you're drowning in guilt right now, probably blaming yourself for not visiting more, for being too busy, for forgetting promises you think you made. Stop it. Stop that right now. Lewis let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. You think you failed me? Lewis, every time you got in that car and refused to give up, every time you spoke out about injustice, even when it was easier to stay silent, every time you proved that a black boy from a council estate could become the greatest, that was you keeping your promise to me. I never needed a house in Spain. I needed to see you fly. And you flew so high, mi mariposa, so impossibly high. But now it's time for something else. It's time for you to receive what I've been saving for you. Not money. Something more important. Go to the address. Open the door. You'll understand everything. And Lewis, Whatever happens next in your life, more championships, retirement, whatever path you choose, remember this: you were loved completely, just for being you. Not for winning, not for being famous, just for being the boy who ate empanadas in my kitchen and dreamed impossible dreams. That boy is still inside you. Don't lose him. Con todo mi amor, Mama Carmen P.S. The key opens more than just a door, mijo. Trust me. Louis finished reading and sat motionless, tears streaming down his face. He didn't bother wiping them away. Mr. Pemberton pushed a box of tissues across the desk. She recorded that letter on video, too. Asked me to include it in her arrangements. Here, she knew you'd need to hear her voice. Video? Louis looked up. It's at the address, along with everything else. Mr. Pemberton opened the envelope on his desk and pulled out a modern key attached to a keychain. The keychain was shaped like a tiny racing helmet, painted in the colors of the British flag. He slid it across the desk along with a piece of paper containing an address. 34 Mariposa Lane, Upper Willow, Hertfordshire. Mariposa, Louis whispered. Butterfly in Spanish. Mrs. Rodriguez purchased the property 18 months ago, Mr. Pemberton explained. She spent the last year of her life preparing it. I handled the legal paperwork, but she never told me what was inside. She said that was between her and you. Louis picked up the key, feeling its weight. What is this place? I honestly don't know. She paid groundskeepers to maintain it, had various contractors do work there, but she swore them all to secrecy. She was very particular about you being the first to see whatever she created. Louis closed the shoebox lid carefully, reverently. Can I take this with me? Of course. It's yours. Everything in it is yours. Mr. Pemberton paused. Mr. Hamilton, I've been a solicitor for 35 years. I've administered hundreds of wills, but I've never seen someone put as much thought and love into their final gift as Mrs. Rodriguez did. Whatever's waiting for you at that address, she poured her heart into it. Louis stood, holding the shoebox against his chest like it was made of glass. The key felt heavy in his pocket. How far is Upper Willow? About 90 minutes north. She specified you should go before sunset today, if possible, on something about the light being right. Mr. Pemberton smiled slightly. She was very particular about details. That sounded like Carmen, particular about everything except her own needs. Louis shook Mr. Pemberton's hand. Thank you for handling this, for being kind about it. She made it easy. She planned everything down to the smallest detail. Even picked out the flowers for her funeral. Gardenias and roses, your favorites, apparently. Louis hadn't known gardenias and roses were his favorites until that moment. But Carmen had known. Of course she had. She'd known him better than he knew himself. He walked down the narrow staircase, out into the gray Stevenage afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving everything damp and glistening. 90 minutes to Upper Willow. 90 minutes to discover what Carmen had spent 18 months preparing. What she'd been saving for him all along. Louis placed the shoebox carefully on the passenger seat, buckled it in like it was a person. Then he started the car and drove north, toward whatever final gift Carmen Rodriguez had left for the boy she'd raised, the man she'd believed in, and the champion she'd helped create. Louis couldn't drive yet. His hands were still shaking too badly. He sat in the rental car outside Mr. Pemberton's office, the shoebox on his lap, unable to move. People walked past on the sidewalk, a mother with a stroller, teenagers laughing, an old man with a newspaper. Normal people having normal days. Louis felt like he was underwater, watching the world through thick glass. He opened the shoebox again, unable to help himself, and needing to touch the contents to prove they were real. The newspaper clippings were on top. He'd only glanced at them before. Now he read them properly, one by one. The 2007 article about his rookie season, Hamilton makes history. Carmen had underlined a quote from him, "I race for everyone who told me I couldn't." In the margin, her handwriting, "And for everyone who told you that you could, mijo." A 2012 piece about his move to Mercedes. Risky career change for British driver. Carmen had circled the word risky and written, "Bravery, not risk. Big difference." But it was a 2014 article that broke him completely. After he'd won his first championship, a journalist had written a critical piece questioning whether Lewis's lifestyle, his fashion, his music interests, his celebrity friends, was appropriate for a Formula One champion. Carmen had drawn angry stars all over that article. Her note in the margin said, "This writer is scared of a black man being himself. Let them be scared. You be free." Lewis remembered reading that article at the time. It had stung, made him doubt himself, made him wonder if he should tone things down, fit in better, be less himself. He'd never known Carmen had seen it, never known she'd been fighting those battles with him from 3 doors down a council estate, armed with nothing but a red pen and unwavering belief. Lewis set the clippings aside carefully and picked up the ticket stubs again. 16 years of British Grand Prix races. He arranged them in chronological order on the dashboard, studying each one. 2007, general admission, Cop's Corner. Lewis's rookie season. He'd finished 3rd, his first British Grand Prix podium. To 2008, general admission, Club Corner. He'd finished 4th that year, disappointed but determined. The tickets continued year by year. Never VIP, never hospitality. Always the cheapest seats available. Lewis pulled out his phone and did quick math. General admission tickets averaged £150 per year, sometimes more. 16 years meant Carmen had spent at least £2,400 to watch him race. Probably more when accounting for travel, food, accommodation. For a woman who cleaned houses for a living, who took the bus because she didn't own a car, who bought her clothes from charity shops, she'd spent thousands of pounds to sit in crowded grandstands, in rain and heat, just to watch him drive past at 200 miles per hour for 2 seconds per lap. And she'd never told him, and never asked for pit passes or paddock access or any of the things Lewis could have arranged with a single phone call. Lewis's chest ached. He picked up the 2019 ticket stub, the race where he'd left quickly, frustrated with 3rd place. Carmen had been 66 years old that year. She'd taken a bus to Silverstone, probably stood for hours, watched him finish disappointed, then taken a bus home. All without telling him. Why? Why hadn't she reached out? But he knew why. It was written in her letter. She didn't want to be a distraction, didn't want you worrying about her when you should be focused on racing. Carmen had loved him enough to be invisible, loved him enough to support him without adding pressure or obligation, loved him enough to let him forget she existed while she remembered everything about him. Lewis's phone buzzed, and his brother Nicholas. "Dad said you're in England? Everything okay?" Lewis stared at the message. How could he explain this? How could he put into words what he was feeling? He typed, "Carmen passed away. I'm handling her will." The response came immediately. "Oh no, Lewis, I'm so sorry. She was amazing. Are you okay?" Was he okay? No, he would never be okay again. "I will be," Lewis typed back. "I'll call you later." He put the phone away and reached for the photograph again. 7-year-old Louis asleep on the floral couch, Carmen watching over him with that expression of complete love. Louis traced his small, sleeping face in the photo. That boy had felt safe, had felt seen, had felt like he mattered, not because of what he could do, but because of who he was. When had he last felt that way? He turned the photo over again, on reading Carmen's handwriting. My greatest blessing, September 2000. September 2000. Louis tried to remember. He'd been racing karts, doing well. His father had been working 3 jobs to fund it. Money had been impossibly tight. A flash of memory. Carmen insisting he take empanadas to the track that day, packing them herself, along with juice boxes and fruit. Louis had been embarrassed. Other kids had money for the snack bar, but Carmen had pressed the cooler into his hands. "You eat proper food," she'd said firmly, "not that garbage from vending machines." Louis hadn't understood then that Carmen had probably used her grocery money for that week to pack his cooler. Hadn't realized she'd go without, so he could eat properly. Now, 25 years later, sitting in a car outside a solicitor's office, he finally understood. Every empanada, and every word of encouragement, every hour she'd spent raising him, Carmen had poured her life into his, drop by drop, without ever asking for repayment. Louis looked at the sealed letter again, the one he'd only partially read. His hands steadied enough to unfold it once more. He reread from the beginning, this time letting every word sink in. "Don't you dare cry for too long. You have races to win, mi campeón." Even in death, Carmen was practical. Racing came first. Dreams came first. She'd always understood that. "You think you failed me? Louis, every time you got in that car and refused to give up, every time you spoke out about injustice even when it was easier to stay silent, every time you proved that a black boy from a council estate could become the greatest, that was you keeping your promise to me." Louis's vision blurred again. She hadn't wanted a house in Spain. She'd wanted exactly what he'd given her. Proof that the world was wrong about what was possible. "I never needed a house in Spain. I needed to see you fly." There it was, the truth that both broke and healed him. Carmen hadn't measured his love in gifts or visits or money. She'd measured it in the life he'd lived, the barriers he'd broken, the boy he'd stayed true to even while becoming a man. But there was still the mysterious final gift. The address, the key in his pocket shaped like a racing helmet. Louis carefully placed everything back in the shoebox except for the photograph. That he tucked into his jacket pocket, against his heart. He checked the time. 3:30 in the afternoon. 90 minutes to Upper Willow meant he'd arrive around 5 o'clock. Carmen had specified before sunset. Today, he's in December, sunset would be around 4:30. He needed to go. Now. Louis started the car, his hands finally steady. He placed the shoebox gently on the passenger seat again, making sure it was secure. As he pulled into traffic, he noticed something he'd missed before. At the bottom of the shoebox, beneath where everything else had been stacked, was a small card. At the next red light, Louis reached over and pulled it out. The card showed a painted butterfly, bright blue and gold, wings spread wide. On the back, in Carmen's handwriting, "Mariposas don't apologize for transforming. They just fly. Time for you to land for a moment, mi mariposa. See what I built for you." Louis pressed the card to his lips, then tucked it into his pocket with the photograph. The light turned green. He drove north, toward Upper Willow, toward Mariposa Lane, toward whatever impossible gift Carmen Rodriguez had spent the last year of her life creating for him. The December sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the gray English sky in shades of pink and gold. Louis pressed the accelerator, racing against the sunset, racing toward answers, racing toward the final gift from the only person who'd ever loved him without conditions or limits or end. Even death, it seemed, hadn't stopped Carmen from taking care of him. Even death hadn't stopped her from believing he deserved something beautiful. The GPS led Louis through countryside he'd never seen before. The motorway gave way to A roads, then B roads, then narrow lanes bordered by hedgerows and bare winter trees. The landscape rolled gently, a field stretching toward a sky that was already shifting from afternoon blue to early evening gold. Upper Willow wasn't marked on most maps. Louis almost missed the turn, a small wooden sign half hidden by overgrown ivy. He slowed the car, turning onto a single-track road that wound through what looked like a forgotten corner of Hertfordshire. The village itself was tiny, maybe 40 houses clustered around a village green with a war memorial, and a post office that looked permanently closed. A pub called the Willow Tree had smoke curling from its chimney. An old church sat on a small hill, its stone walls covered in moss. Louis drove slowly, searching for Mariposa Lane. His heart was beating too fast. His palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. The GPS announced, "In 200 yards, a turn right onto Mariposa Lane." Louis saw it, a narrow lane branching off from the main road, lined with bare oak trees. A small street sign confirmed it, Mariposa Lane. Someone had painted a tiny butterfly next to the name. Carmen. It had to be Carmen's doing. Louis turned onto the lane, his tires crunching on gravel. The houses here were small cottages, well-maintained, with neat gardens and stone walls. Smoke rose from several chimneys. Christmas lights twinkled in windows, despite it being only mid-December. Number 12. Number 18. Number 26. Louis's breathing quickened. Number 34. He stopped the car in the middle of the lane, staring. The cottage was small, much smaller than any of his houses, but it was perfect. The exterior walls were painted in warm terracotta and cream, the colors of a Spanish villa. The roof was slate, recently repaired. The windows were large and clean, reflecting the dying sunlight. But it was the garden that stopped his breath. Even in winter, it was beautiful. Someone had planted it with care. Winter flowering plants in beds mulched with dark soil. A path of golden stone led to the front door. Lavender bushes lined the path, dormant now but clearly established. And in the corner, next to a small bench, grew a large butterfly bush, a buddleia that somehow still had a few late purple blooms despite the December cold. Louis sat motionless, the engine idling, unable to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just a house. This was a home. Someone's dream, carefully realized. Smoke curled from the chimney. The windows glowed with warm light from inside. This place was alive, cared for, loved. And Carmen had bought it. For him. Louis turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt profound. He sat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady himself. Then he noticed the envelope taped to the front door. He got out of the car slowly, like he was in a dream. The air was cold and smelled like wood smoke and damp earth. His footsteps on the stone path seemed too loud. The envelope had his name written on it in different handwriting. Mr. Pemberton's, not Carmen's. Louis pulled it off carefully and opened it. Mr. Hamilton, Mrs. Rodriguez arranged for groundskeepers and house staff to prepare the cottage for your arrival. The heat has been on since this morning. There's food in the kitchen. Mrs. Rodriguez left very specific instructions about your favorites. Oh, she asked that you spend at least 1 hour inside before making any decisions about the property. This is your time alone. No one will disturb you. Lock the door behind you when you enter. The cottage is yours now, in every way that matters. Mrs. Rodriguez's final words about this place were, "Louis needs somewhere to land, somewhere to remember." Louis folded the note with shaking hands and pulled out the key from his pocket. The little racing helmet keychain caught the last rays of sunlight, gleaming. He walked to the door, painted in that same sunshine yellow Carmen had always loved. His hand trembled as he fit the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. The door swung open. Louis stepped inside and stopped breathing. The cottage was warm. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace to the left. The late afternoon light poured through large windows, making everything glow. But it was the furniture that destroyed him. The floral couch. Carmen's floral couch from her council flat. The one Louis had slept on as a child. The one from the photograph. But it had been professionally restored. The fabric cleaned and reinforced. The cushions replaced. The wooden feet polished. It sat in the center of the living room like a throne, like a piece of sacred history. Louis walked toward it slowly, reaching out to touch the fabric. The pattern was exactly as he remembered, pink and yellow flowers on a cream background. His fingers traced the armrest, where he'd rested his head 1,000 times. He could almost smell the empanadas, could almost hear Carmen singing while she cooked, could almost feel 7-year-old Louis falling asleep, safe and loved. Louis sank onto the couch and buried his face in his hands, sobbing. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Eventually, Louis lifted his head and looked around properly. The cottage was small but perfectly designed. The living room flowed into an open kitchen. The kitchen had Spanish tiles, blue and white, intricate patterns that looked hand-painted. Copper pots hung from hooks. The counters were clean and bare except for a bowl of fresh oranges. Oranges. Carmen's favorite fruit. Louis stood and walked into the kitchen, his legs unsteady. On the table sat a laptop, plugged in and charging. A sticky note was attached to it, Carmen's handwriting. "Press play, mijo." Louis's heart hammered. Not yet. He couldn't handle that yet. He opened the refrigerator instead. Inside, neatly arranged, were containers of food. Louis opened one and the smell made him gasp. Ropa vieja, Carmen's recipe, still warm in the container. Someone had cooked it today, following her instructions. Black beans, rice, plantains, all his favorites, all Carmen's recipes. Louis closed the refrigerator and leaned against it, overwhelmed. He explored further. A narrow hallway led to 2 rooms. The first was a small bathroom with a clawfoot tub and more of those beautiful Spanish tiles. Towels hung on heated racks, soft and warm to touch. The second room was the bedroom. Louis stopped in the doorway, his breath catching. The bed was simple but inviting, covered in a handmade quilt in shades of blue and gold. But it was the wall that made Louis's knees buckle. Someone had painted a mural, a timeline. His entire racing career from age 6 to the present day, rendered in exquisite detail by what must have been a professional artist. 6-year-old Louis in his first cart, helmet too big for his head. 10-year-old Louis holding a trophy, gap-toothed grin. Teenager Louis signing with McLaren. Louis at his first Grand Prix. Louis winning his first championship, arms raised in triumph. Every major moment, painted with care and skill and love. The colors were vibrant, blues and reds and silvers, with gold leaf accents that caught the light. But at the end of the timeline, the wall was left blank. Just white space, waiting. Beneath it, painted in Carmen's handwriting, "Achievements yet to come." Louis slid down the wall and sat on the floor, staring at the mural through tears he couldn't control. Carmen had commissioned this, had probably spent hours with the artist, describing each moment, at each victory, each step of Louis's journey. She'd invested time and money and energy into celebrating his life on a wall he'd never seen. Until now. Achievements yet to come. She'd believed, right until the end, that his story wasn't finished, that more glory awaited, that the blank wall would someday be filled. Louis pulled his knees to his chest, the same position he'd been in on those council flat steps at age 6, waiting for his father, before Carmen had invited him inside. And now here he was, 35 years later, inside a home Carmen had built for him. A home he'd never asked for. A home she'd created because she'd known, somehow, that he needed it. That he needed somewhere to land, somewhere to remember, somewhere to be just Louis, not Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion. And the sun was setting outside the bedroom window, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Louis watched the light change, thinking about butterflies and Spanish houses and promises kept in ways he'd never imagined. Carmen hadn't needed the house in Spain. She'd built this instead, for him. And he was only just beginning to understand why. Louis didn't know how long he sat on the bedroom floor, staring at the mural. The light outside faded from gold to purple, to deep blue. Stars began appearing through the window. His phone buzzed several times. He ignored it. The world outside this cottage didn't matter right now. Nothing mattered except understanding what Carmen had done, what she'd been trying to tell him. Finally, when his legs went numb from sitting, Louis stood. He walked back through the hallway, trailing his fingers along the walls. Everything was perfect. Every detail considered. The light switches were exactly where you'd want them. The floors were warm underfoot, heated, he realized. Even the air smelled right, like lavender and wood smoke and something else he couldn't name. Home. It smelled like home. He found himself back in the kitchen, standing in front of the laptop on the table. The sticky note with Carmen's handwriting seemed to glow in the lamplight. "Press play, mijo." Louis pulled out a chair and sat. His hand hovered over the keyboard, trembling. Once he pressed play, Carmen would speak to him. He'd hear her voice again. And that would make her death real in a way nothing else had yet. But he'd come this far. He couldn't turn back now. Louis opened the laptop. The screen came to life immediately, showing a single video file on the desktop. The file name was just his name, Louis.mp4, dated 8 months ago, May 2024. Louis moved the cursor to the play button, hesitated, then clicked. The screen filled with Carmen's face, and Louis made a sound like he'd been punched. She was sitting in this kitchen. He recognized the Spanish tiles behind her. She wore her favorite yellow cardigan, the one she'd owned for 20 years. Her hair was completely gray now, pulled back in a bun. She looked thinner than he remembered, her cheekbones more prominent, but her eyes were bright and alive. She was smiling. "Hola, mi Louis," Carmen began, and Louis crumbled, hearing her voice again. That voice that had sung to him, scolded him, encouraged him, loved him. He pressed his hands to his mouth, trying not to sob too loudly, unafraid he'd miss her words. "If you're watching this, I've gone ahead to prepare the next place, as we Catholics say. Don't be sad. I lived a beautiful life, especially the years I got to love you." Carmen leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. "By now you've seen the cottage. You're probably confused. probably thinking I spent money foolishly, probably feeling guilty. She wagged her finger at the camera. "Stop that. Let me explain." She settled back in her chair, and Louis noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Had she been sick even then? Why hadn't anyone told him? "For 40 years, I saved money," Carmen continued. "Not a lot. I was never rich. But a little bit from each paycheck, week after week, year after year. I was saving for my retirement home in Spain near Eduardo's village. And you remember me talking about it?" Louis nodded at the screen, tears streaming down his face. "I dreamed about that house. Orange trees in the garden, warm sun, the sound of Spanish in the streets. It kept me going through hard times. But then something changed." Carmen's smile turned soft, almost sad. 5 years ago, I realized something important. Spain was a young woman's dream. The dream of the girl who married Eduardo and thought we'd grow old there together. She paused, looking directly into the camera, directly at Louis. "But you became my real dream, mijo. You were the child Eduardo and I never had. Watching you grow, watching you race, watching you become the man you are, that became my purpose, my joy, my Spain." Louis couldn't breathe properly. His chest felt too tight. "So I changed my plans," Carmen said simply. I decided the money I'd saved, almost my entire life savings, would go to something else, something more important than an old woman's house in a country she left 50 years ago. She gestured around the kitchen. "I bought this cottage 3 years ago. Spent the last 18 months preparing it, working with contractors, designers, that lovely artist who painted your timeline. I sold most of my furniture to pay for it. Everything except my couch. That couch had to come here. You know why?" Louis touched the screen gently, wishing he could touch her actual face. "This cottage isn't for show, Louis. It's not about the money I spent or the work I put in. This cottage is my final gift to you, but not the way you think." Carmen leaned forward again, her eyes intense. "I know you have many houses, mijo. Much nicer than this little place. And houses with swimming pools and wine cellars and rooms you've never even used. But those houses, they're for Lewis Hamilton, the driver, the champion, the celebrity, the brand." She pressed her hand to her heart. "This cottage is for Louis. Just Louis, the boy who cried in my kitchen when other kids were cruel. The teenager who doubted himself before big races. The man who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders and forgets sometimes that he's allowed to put it down." The video showed Carmen standing, walking to the window. The camera must have been on a tripod. She looked out at the garden, her back to the lens. "I watch you on television, mijo. I see you smile for cameras. I see you give perfect interviews. I see you be strong and brave and inspiring. And I'm proud. So proud my heart could burst." She turned back to face the camera, and Louis saw tears in her eyes. "But I also see the exhaustion you try to hide, the loneliness, the pressure, and I think, my poor butterfly, flying so high, but where does he land? Where does he rest?" Carmen walked back to her chair and sat. "That's what this cottage is, Louis. It's your landing place. Somewhere you can come when the noise gets too loud. Somewhere nobody knows to look for you. Somewhere you don't have to be perfect or strong or inspiring. Somewhere you can just be." She smiled through her tears. "I spent the last year of my life preparing it as a sanctuary for you. Every detail chosen with care. The colors remind you of warmth and sun. The couch reminds you of safety and childhood. The mural reminds you of how far you've come. The blank wall reminds you there's more ahead, but no pressure about what it should be." Carmen wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so familiar that Louis's heart broke all over again. But here's the most important part, mijo. Listen carefully. She leaned toward the camera, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I used most of my savings to buy this cottage, yes. But I also set up a trust. It will pay the property taxes, the utilities, the maintenance for the next 50 years, maybe longer if my lawyer friend did the math right. Louis's eyes widened. 50 years? How much had she spent? Why did I do that? Carmen continued. Because I know you, Louis Hamilton. I know if there were bills to pay, you'd feel obligated. If there were problems, you'd feel responsible. Excuses. This cottage exists. It's yours, excuses. This cottage exists. It's yours. It costs you nothing to maintain. You can't use money or logistics or practicality as reasons not to come here. The only thing stopping you from using it is you. Carmen sat back, her expression softening again. I'm giving you permission, mijo. Permission to rest. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to be human. Permission to land. She was quiet for a moment, just looking at the camera. Then she smiled that smile Louis had known his entire life. The one that said everything would be okay, even when it felt like the world was ending. You probably have questions. Why didn't I tell you about this while I was alive? Why make it a surprise? Carmen shrugged. Because if I'd told you, you would have objected. You would have said it was too much, tried to give me money, made it about you taking care of me instead of me taking care of you. She was right. Louis would have done exactly that. This way, you can't argue, can't refuse, can't turn it into something you owe me. It's done. It's yours. Accept it. Carmen stood again, and Louis sensed the video was nearing its end. She walked closer to the camera, her face filling the screen. Mi amor, I don't know how much longer I have. The doctors say my heart is weaker than they'd like. Maybe I have years, maybe less. But I needed to make sure this was ready for you before I go. Tears rolled down her cheeks now, but she was still smiling. When you feel lost, come here. When you feel tired, come here. And if she could touch him through the screen, if she could touch him through the screen. You gave me everything, Louis. You gave me purpose and joy and pride beyond measure. You made my life matter in ways I never imagined. And now, I get to give you one last thing. A place to remember that you matter too. Not for what you win, not for what you achieve, just for being you. Carmen's voice broke slightly. Te amo, mijo. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, more than all the races you'll ever win, more than all the words in all the languages. You were my greatest blessing, my miracle, my answered prayer. She blew a kiss to the camera. Vuela alto, mi mariposa. Fly high, my butterfly. But remember, butterflies must land sometimes too. Come land here. Come home. She reached forward, and the screen went black. Louis sat frozen, staring at the dark screen, his face wet with tears. The cottage was silent except for the crackle of the fire and his own ragged breathing. Carmen's voice echoed in his mind. You were my greatest blessing. No, she had it backward. She was his blessing. She'd always been his blessing. And her final act of love was to give him this. A place to land, a place to rest, a place to remember who he was when the world forgot to see him as human. Louis lowered his head to the table and wept like he hadn't wept since he was a child, his body shaking with the force of grief and gratitude and love so overwhelming it felt like it would break him apart. Outside, through the window, Not the first stars appeared over Mariposa Lane. Inside, in the cottage Carmen had built with her life savings, Lewis Hamilton finally let himself break. Because Carmen had given him permission, and because here, in this place she'd created, he was finally safe enough to fall apart. Lewis woke on the floral couch, disoriented. Dawn light filtered through the windows, pale and cold. He'd cried himself to sleep, too exhausted to make it to the bedroom. Someone had left a blanket folded on the couch. Carmen's doing, probably, instructed months ago, and he'd pulled it over himself sometime in the night. His eyes felt swollen. His throat was raw, but something had shifted inside him. The grief was still there, enormous and crushing, but beneath it was something else. Peace, maybe. Or acceptance. He wasn't sure yet. Lewis sat up slowly. The cabinet above the coffee maker, the cabinet above the coffee maker, he found everything already prepared. His favorite coffee beans, the Ethiopian blend he ordered online, filters, sugar. Even the mug waiting beside the machine had World Champion painted on it in Carmen's handwriting, clearly custom-made. Lewis made coffee with shaking hands, the familiar ritual grounding him. While it brewed, he heated the ropa vieja from the refrigerator. The smell filled the kitchen, and for a moment, Lewis could almost believe Carmen was there, humming while she cooked. He ate standing at the counter, too hungry to sit. The food tasted exactly like he remembered. Someone had followed Carmen's recipes perfectly. Every spice balanced, every flavor correct. After eating, Lewis poured a second cup of coffee and wandered the cottage properly, seeing details he'd missed the night before. In the living room, a bookshelf held racing books he'd mentioned loving in interviews over the years, books about Senna, Fangio, Clark, but also books about Cuban history, about immigration, about finding home in foreign places. Carmen's story and his side by side. In the study, he'd missed this room entirely last night, there was a desk by the window overlooking the garden. On it sat a journal, leather-bound with his name embossed in gold. He opened it. The first page had Carmen's handwriting. For the thoughts you can't say out loud. For the fears you can't share. For the dreams that feel too big or too small. Write them here. No one will judge. No one will see. This is your space, to be honest. Mama Carmen. Lewis touched the blank pages, thinking about all the things he'd never said, all the doubts he'd swallowed, all the moments he'd smiled for cameras while screaming inside. He closed the journal carefully and continued exploring. The closets held clothes in his size, comfortable things, not designer labels, soft sweaters, worn jeans, t-shirts, clothes for being, not for being seen. The bathroom cabinet contained his favorite toiletries, his preferred brands of everything. Carmen must have researched, asked people, pieced together the details of his life from interviews and observations. Every corner of the cottage showed that same attention. This wasn't just a house she'd bought. This was a portrait of him. And was even more impressive. The artist was even more impressive. The artist had captured not just the moments, but the emotions. The joy of victory, the devastation of defeat, the determination in young Lewis's eyes. But it was the blank wall that kept drawing his attention. Achievements yet to come. What did that mean now? More championships? Maybe. Retirement? Eventually. Something else entirely? For the first time in years, Lewis didn't know the answer. Didn't know what he wanted the blank wall to say. And strangely, that felt okay. Lewis noticed something he'd missed last night. A small shelf beside the bed held framed photographs. He picked them up one by one. Louis, at 7, covered in mud after his first karting win. See, trophy bigger than his torso. Louis, at 12, with Carmen and his father, the three of them squinting in the sun at a track somewhere. Louis, at 18, the day he signed with McLaren, his father's arm around him. But there was also a photograph Louis had never seen before. Carmen, as a young woman, maybe 25, standing beside a handsome man in front of a small house. Cuba, Louis guessed from the architecture. The man must be Eduardo, Carmen's late husband. They both looked radiantly happy. Louis studied Carmen's young face. She'd been beautiful, full of life and hope. She'd had her own dreams, her own story, before Louis had ever existed. And she'd given up her final dream, the retirement house in Spain, to build this place for him instead. The weight of that sacrifice pressed against Louis's chest, and he set the photograph down and noticed a drawer in the bedside table. He opened it, not sure what he expected to find. Inside was another letter, sealed in an envelope, his name on the front in Carmen's shaky handwriting. Different from the letter in the shoebox. This one felt thicker, heavier. Louis sat on the bed and opened it carefully. The date at the top was just 3 weeks ago. November 26th, 2024. Days before Carmen died. His hands trembled as he began to read. My dearest Louis, if you're reading this, you found my cottage. You've watched my video. You're probably overwhelmed and confused and angry that I spent so much on you. Stop being angry. Old women get to spend their money however they like, and I chose to spend mine on you. But there's something I need to tell you. Something I couldn't say in the video. Something that's been weighing on my heart. In 2008, after you won your first championship, you sent me a check. Do you remember? £50,000. The note said, "For the house in Spain, Mama Carmen. I never forget my promises." Louis gasped, the letter nearly falling from his hands. He had no memory of this, none at all. But his life had been chaos in 2008. The championship, the parties, the media tornado. His team had handled so many things. He kept reading, his heart pounding. I never cashed that check, mijo. It's with this letter, in the envelope. Louis looked in the envelope and pulled out a yellowed check, dated December 2008. His signature at the bottom, made out to Carmen Rodriguez. £50,000. Never cashed, never deposited. The check had aged in her drawer for 16 years, while Carmen continued cleaning houses, taking buses, and living modestly. Tears blurred Louis's vision, but he forced himself to keep reading. I didn't cash it, not because I didn't treasure the gesture. That check meant everything to me, proof that you'd remembered, that you'd kept your promise even when you didn't have to. But I didn't need the money, Louis. Not really. You want to know what I did instead? I framed it. Hung it on my bedroom wall where I could see it every morning. Your signature, your promise, your heart. That was worth more than any house. But then, 3 years ago, I took it down. Not because it stopped mattering, but because I realized something. You'd been beating yourself up for years about that promise. I saw it in your eyes the few times we talked. I heard it in your voice when you asked about my retirement plans. You thought you'd failed me. So I decided to build the cottage instead. To use my own savings, my own choices, to give you something you didn't expect and couldn't feel guilty about. The check stays uncashed because you never owed me anything, Louis. Not money, not houses, not anything. You already gave me everything. Your success was the house in Spain, the fortune, the dream realized. Every time you got in that car and proved the world wrong, Every time you stood up for what was right, even when it cost you. Every time you stayed true to yourself. That was my reward. That was more than enough. Louis couldn't see the words anymore through his tears. He pressed the check and letter against his chest, rocking slightly. He'd sent the money. He'd kept his promise. He hadn't forgotten. Somewhere in the chaos of 2008, his heart had remembered even if his mind had been overwhelmed. And Carmen had known, had kept the proof for 16 years, had never told him, never used it to make him feel better about his absence, never cashed it even when money was tight. Because she hadn't wanted his money. She'd wanted his dreams. Louis kept reading through tears. Now, about this cottage. I need you to understand something important. This isn't me taking care of you out of obligation or duty. This is me celebrating you, honoring you, loving you the only way I know how, by making sure you have what you need, even if you don't know you need it yet. You think you failed me by not visiting enough? By being too busy? By forgetting promises? But Louis, you never forgot. Your heart sent that check in 2008. Your heart kept racing, kept fighting, and kept making me proud every single day. That's the gift you gave me. Not houses or money or visits. The gift was watching you become exactly who you were meant to be. So now take mine. Take this cottage. Take this rest. Take this peace. Promise me you'll land here when the world asks too much. Promise me you'll let yourself be loved, even when you feel you don't deserve it. Especially then. You think you owe me? Fine. Here's how you pay me back. Use this place. Come here when you're tired. Come here when you doubt yourself. Come here to remember that you're more than what you win or lose. Come here to be human. That's all I ever wanted for you. Not perfection. Not endless achievement. Just the freedom to be fully yourself. Flaws, fears, doubts, and all. Con todo mi amor. Mama Carmen P.S. The real gift isn't the house, mijo. Oh, it's what's in the garden. Go look under the butterfly bush before you leave. I buried something there for you. Something more important than anything inside these walls. Louis finished reading and sat motionless, the letter in one hand, the uncashed check in the other. 16 years. She'd kept it for 16 years, never telling him, never using it against him, just holding the proof that he'd remembered, because she'd known he'd need to know someday. The morning sun streamed through the bedroom window, warming his face. Louis looked at the mural again, at the blank wall waiting for whatever came next. Carmen had given him so much more than a cottage. She'd given him proof that he wasn't the person he'd feared he'd become, the person too busy, too important, too consumed by success to remember where he came from. But his heart had remembered. The check proved it. And now Carmen was asking one final thing. Go to the garden. Look under the butterfly bush. Louis stood on shaky legs, tucked the letter and check carefully into his pocket, alongside the photograph, and walked toward the back door. Whatever Carmen had buried in the garden, whatever final secret she'd left for him, he was ready to discover it. Or at least, he hoped he was. The back door opened onto a small patio made of the same golden stone as the front path. Louis stepped out into the cold December morning, his breath forming clouds in the air. The garden was larger than it had appeared from the front, maybe 40 feet deep, bordered by a low stone wall covered in ivy. Even in winter, someone had maintained it beautifully. Raised beds held dormant herbs and vegetables. I was magnificent, easily 8 feet tall and was magnificent, easily 8 feet tall and nearly as wide. Despite the season being completely wrong for it, The buddleia had clusters of purple blooms scattered among its branches. Impossible flowers that shouldn't exist in December but did anyway. Louis walked toward it slowly, his shoes crunching on frost-covered grass. Morning dew clung to everything, making the garden sparkle. Next to the butterfly bush was a small stone bench and a marker embedded in the ground. Louis knelt beside it, brushing away fallen leaves. The stone was engraved, "Para mi mariposa," for my butterfly. Louis's throat tightened. He looked around the base of the bush, searching for signs of recently disturbed soil. There, near the roots, the earth was different, darker, newer. He began digging with his bare hands, not caring about the dirt under his fingernails or the cold mud seeping through his jeans. His fingers hit something solid within seconds. A metal box, waterproof and sealed with heavy-duty latches. Louis pulled it free and sat back on his heels, holding it in his lap. The box was surprisingly heavy. He brushed the dirt off, revealing a small plaque on the lid. For Louis, the real story. The real story? What did that mean? Louis opened the latches. They released with a soft click. Inside were journals, dozens of small notebooks, the cheap kind you could buy at corner shops. They were stacked carefully, each one labeled with dates spanning decades. Louis pulled out the first one, dated 1995 to 1998. He opened it to a random page. March 1997. Louis came home crying today. The boys at school said racing is for rich white kids who can afford to lose. I held him while he cried, then made him empanadas. While he ate, I told him his gift is bigger than their small minds. I told him someday he'll be champion, and they'll all know they were wrong. But what I didn't tell him, I used this week's grocery money to buy him those new racing gloves he needed, the ones that fit properly. Anthony doesn't know. He's stretched too thin already. I'll eat rice and beans for the next 2 weeks. Small price to watch my boy grip that wheel the right way. My Eduardo would have loved this child, would have loved his determination, his fire. I know Eduardo sent him to me. My angel sent me an angel. Louis's hands shook, and he turned to another entry. July 1997. Louis won his regional championship today. The trophy is bigger than he is. He was so happy, so proud. But then that man, the one whose son came second, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Standards really have dropped if they're giving trophies to anyone these days." I saw Louis's face crumble, saw him understand what the man meant without saying it outright. I wanted to scream at that man, wanted to tell him my Louis has more talent in his little finger than his spoiled son will ever have. But I didn't. Instead, I took Louis for ice cream, let him talk about the race, reminded him that jealousy always sounds like cruelty. Tonight, I'm paying my electric bill 3 weeks late. The late fee hurts, but Louis needed new tires for his cart. The ones he had were dangerous. Anthony is working overtime, but it's still not enough. I have some jewelry from Cuba, my mother's earrings. I can sell them. They're just things. Louis's safety is everything. Louis closed the journal, his vision swimming. He opened another one from 2003. November 2003. Louis got into the prestigious racing academy. Anthony cried when they told him. I cried too, but waited until I got home. This is it. This is the beginning of everything. But the costs. God, the costs. They need £5,000 up front. Anthony is taking a third job. I told him I'll help. I have £2,000 saved from my Spain fund. I'll give it all. He doesn't know about the Spain fund. Nobody does. It's my secret dream, the house Eduardo and I plan to retire to. But dreams can change. Dreams should change. Luis is my dream now. Spain can wait. Spain will always be there. And Eduardo, mi amor, if you're watching from heaven, I hope you understand. I hope you're proud of what we're building with this boy. He's going to do something impossible. I know it in my bones. Luis had to stop reading. His chest hurt. Each entry was a revelation, a hidden sacrifice, a moment of love he'd never known about. He opened a journal from 2008. December 2008. Luis sent me a check today, £50,000, for the house in Spain. He remembered. After everything, the championship, the fame, the chaos, he remembered his promise. I cried for an hour holding that check. Not because of the amount, though it's more money than I've ever seen in my life. I cried because his heart is still pure, still good, still the boy who cried in my kitchen. I'm not going to cash it. I'm going to frame it. Put it where I can see it every morning. Not because this check isn't about money. It's proof that success hasn't changed him. It's proof that all those sacrifices, the meals I skipped, the bills I paid late, the dreams I deferred, they were worth it. He turned out perfect. Not perfect like flawless. Perfect like fully himself. That's all I ever wanted. Luis pulled out more journals, flipping through years of his life documented from Carmen's perspective. Every race she'd attended, and she'd attended hundreds of local races before he went professional, every setback, every triumph, every moment of doubt. But it wasn't just a record of his achievements, it was a record of her sacrifices. Meals skipped so she could buy him equipment. Bills paid late so she could afford track fees. Her mother's jewelry sold. Her father's watch pawned. Medical care deferred because Luis needed new tires. So holidays spent working extra shifts so she could give him Christmas money. Year after year after year of Carmen Rodriguez pouring her life into his, drop by precious drop, never telling him, never asking for recognition, just loving him with everything she had. Luis found an entry from 2 years ago. January 2023. I saw Luis on television today. He looked tired, so tired. The reporter asked if he was considering retirement. He smiled, that media smile, not his real one, and said he's never felt better. But I know him. I know that smile. He's exhausted. The pressure is crushing him, and he thinks he has to carry it alone. I'm afraid Luis thinks he disappointed me by not visiting more. I need him to know. Every trophy he lifts, every barrier he breaks, every child who sees him and thinks I can do that too, these visits filled my days with more joy than 1,000 Sunday dinners could. His presence in this world is his presence in my life. That has always been enough. That will always be enough. But I worry he's forgotten how to rest, forgotten how to land. So I've decided. I'm buying the cottage, using my Spain money. I'll spend my final years making him a sanctuary instead. A place where he can remember who he is when no one's watching. This is my last gift to him. Not things, not money, just space to breathe. Luis found the final journal, dated this year. The entries were shorter, the handwriting shakier. October 2024. The doctors say my heart is giving out. Maybe months, maybe less. I'm not afraid. I've lived a full life, loved fully, mattered to someone who mattered to the world. But I need to finish the cottage, need to record the video, need to write the letters, need to make sure Luis understands. I need him to know the sacrifices weren't sacrifices. They were privileges. Every meal I skipped, I did it gladly. Every bill I paid late, I did it with joy. Because I got to love him. I got to help him fly. That was never a burden. It was the greatest honor of my life. The final entry was dated 3 days before her death. November 28th, 2024. I'm very weak now. The nurses say it won't be long. I keep trying to finish this letter, but my hands shake too much. If he wants to honor me, he can... The entry stopped mid-sentence. The pen had trailed off. Carmen must have been too weak to continue. Louis stared at the incomplete sentence, his tears falling onto the page, smudging the ink. She'd never finished it. And death had come first. Whatever Carmen meant to write, whatever final instruction she'd wanted to leave, it was lost. Or was it? Louis sat in the garden, surrounded by decades of Carmen's documentation, her secret sacrifices, her hidden love. The morning sun warmed his back. Somewhere nearby, birds were singing. He looked at the incomplete sentence again. If he wants to honor me, he can... And suddenly, Louis understood. She'd left it incomplete on purpose. Carmen had spent 40 years guiding him, supporting him, telling him what to do and how to be. She'd given him everything: love, structure, belief, sacrifice. And her final act was to stop, to leave that sentence unfinished, to give him the freedom to complete it himself. She wasn't telling him how to honor her because it was time for him to choose. Time for him to write his own ending. Time for him to decide what came next without her instructions, her guidance, her expectations. The blank wall in the bedroom, the incomplete sentence in her final letter. They were the same gift. Permission to write his own story. Permission to fill in the blanks. Permission to choose his path forward, carrying her love, but not her expectations. Louis laughed and cried simultaneously, a sound somewhere between joy and devastation. He understood now. Finally understood. Carmen hadn't failed to finish the sentence. She'd chosen not to. One final gift: his freedom. He looked up at the butterfly bush, at those impossible December blooms, and watched as a butterfly, bright blue and gold, landed on one of the purple flowers. Louis knew it was probably just coincidence, maybe a late-season survivor, maybe drawn by the unlikely blooms. Now then it lifted off, dancing through the Thandrod Sound Sidito. Chuan si sin sanan tut in phone, Hughes the keen. Chuan si hu anin, Goan nandri turquandin reading quan, Chuan fi, sits in feeden fidi, I mein fiu, si can theater, cheating fin tin kin fiti. Chiantin tin tryan pan fi tin twinder, chu feet wine knife chin tin fine tintin. Then it lifted off, dancing through the garden in the morning light, before disappearing over the wall. Louis gathered up the journals carefully, placing them back in the metal box. These were treasures beyond measure. Evidence of a love so complete, so selfless, so pure that it had sustained him his entire life, without him even knowing its full depth. He stood, holding the box against his chest, and walked back toward the cottage. The sun was fully up now, painting everything gold. Mariposa Lane was waking up, smoke from neighboring chimneys, a dog barking somewhere, the sound of a car starting. Louis paused at the back door and looked once more at the garden Carmen had created, at the butterfly bush with its impossible blooms, at the stone that said, "Para mi mariposa." "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for the sacrifices, for the love, for the freedom, for seeing me, for believing in me, for letting me go." The morning breeze stirred the butterfly bush, making it seem almost like it was dancing. Louis smiled through his tears and went inside. He had a funeral to attend, a foundation to establish, a story to finish. And now, for the first time in years, he knew he had a place to land when the flying got too hard. Carmen had made sure of it. 3 days later, Louis stood in the back of St. Mary's Church in Stevenage, watching people file in for Carmen's funeral. He'd arrived early, hoping for a quiet moment before the service, but the church was already half full. He'd expected maybe 30 people. Carmen had been elderly, her friends mostly gone. She'd lived simply, kept to herself. Surely only a handful would come. But the pews kept filling. 50 people. 100. More standing at the back when the seats ran out. Louis watched them come, confused and increasingly emotional. Who were all these people? An elderly black woman with a cane moved slowly down the aisle. A young South Asian couple with 3 small children. A teenager with purple hair and tired eyes. A middle-aged white man in a rumpled suit. They came in all colors, all ages, from all walks of life. And many of them were crying. Mr. Pemberton appeared beside Louis. Quite a turnout. "I don't understand," Louis said quietly. I didn't know Carmen knew this many people." "Mrs. Rodriguez touched a lot of lives," Mr. Pemberton said. "More than even I realized. And I handled her affairs." The church continued filling. By the time the service was scheduled to begin, over 200 people were packed inside, with more standing in the doorway. Father Michael, the elderly priest, looked stunned. "I've served this parish 40 years, he murmured to Louis. "I've never seen a turnout like this." The service began simply. Hymns Carmen had chosen. Traditional Catholic songs in English and Spanish. Readings from Scripture about love and sacrifice and laying up treasures in heaven. Then, Father Michael invited people to share memories. Louis had planned to speak, had written something the night before at the cottage. But his throat closed up when Father Michael looked at him, and he shook his head. Not yet. He couldn't. Not yet. An elderly man stood instead, leaning heavily on the pew in front of him. "My name is Winston Clark. I lived next door to Carmen for 30 years. His voice was thick, with a Jamaican accent and emotion. "When my wife passed, 10 years ago, I didn't want to live anymore. Carmen showed up at my door every single morning for 6 months. Brought me breakfast. Made me eat. Talked to me. Saved my life. Simple as that." He sat down, wiping his eyes. A woman in her 40s stood next. "I'm Amira Hassan. Carmen tutored my family in English when we came from Syria 4 years ago. We had no money to pay her. She said, 'You pay me by building a good life here.' She came to our flat 3 times a week for 2 years. My children learned English. I passed my citizenship test. Because of her." A teenage boy stood, nervous, his hands shaking. "I'm Marcus. I got in trouble a lot. Shoplifting, skipping school, hanging with the wrong people. Carmen caught me trying to steal from her garden one time. I thought she'd call the police. Instead, she made me help her plant vegetables. Then she fed me. Then she asked about my life. She got me into a youth program. I'm in college now because of her. She came to my graduation last year." More people stood, one after another, each with a story. Carmen had volunteered at the community center, teaching elderly residents how to use computers so they could video call their grandchildren. Carmen had organized a fund for a young woman's cancer treatment, quietly collecting donations from the neighborhood. Lonely people in care homes, bringing lonely people in care homes, bringing homemade food and conversation. On and on the stories came, each one revealing another layer of Carmen Rodriguez's life. A life Louis had thought he'd known, but clearly hadn't. Not fully. Louis listened, tears streaming down his face, understanding blooming in his chest. Carmen hadn't just poured her life into him. She'd poured it into everyone. That was who she was, a woman who gave and gave and gave, not from obligation, but from joy, not from duty, but from love. He'd been her greatest project, yes, her miracle. But he hadn't been her only one. Finally, when the stories seemed to be ending, Louis stood. His legs felt weak, but he made himself walk to the front of the church. Father Michael stepped aside, giving him space at the pulpit. Louis looked out at the crowd, at all these faces, all these lives Carmen had touched. The weight of it was staggering. "I came here today," Louis began, his voice rough, "thinking I was burying the woman who raised me, the woman who believed in me when no one else did. My mama, Carmen." He paused, gripping the pulpit. "But I realize now that I'm being selfish. Carmen wasn't just mine. She was—" His voice broke. He took a breath. "She belonged to all of you too, to this whole community, to everyone she fed and helped and loved and believed in." Louis pulled out the photograph from his pocket, the one of him sleeping on her couch as a child. "This is me at 7. Carmen took this photo. I found it in her things. For years, I thought I was special. I thought she loved me differently than other people because I was going to be a race car driver, because I was going to be famous, because I had potential." He looked at the photograph, then back at the crowd. "But listening to your stories, I understand now. Carmen didn't love me because of my potential. She loved me because that's who she was. She loved everyone like that, completely, unconditionally, without expecting anything back." A woman in the third row nodded, crying. "I want to tell you something," Louis continued. "Something I discovered this week. Carmen spent her life savings, 40 years of savings, on a gift for me, a cottage, a sanctuary. She'd been saving for a retirement home in Spain since before I was born, but she spent it all on me instead." Gasps rippled through the church. "When I found out, I felt guilty. I felt like she'd sacrificed too much. But then I read her journals. She left me journals documenting my whole life, and yours too. And I realized something important." Louis's voice grew stronger. "Carmen never saw love as sacrifice. She saw it as privilege. She wrote in one of her journals, 'Every meal I skipped, I did it gladly. Every bill I paid late, I did it with joy. Because I got to love him. I got to help him fly.'" He looked around the church, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "She felt that way about all of you too. About Winston, whose life she saved. About Amira's family, learning English. About Marcus, finding his path. About every single person in this room. Loving you wasn't a burden to Carmen. It was her purpose, her joy." Louis's tears fell freely now, but he didn't wipe them away. I spent years feeling guilty that I didn't visit enough, didn't call enough, didn't give back enough. And maybe that's true. Maybe I should have done more. But Carmen's final gift to me was understanding that she never measured love that way. She measured it by watching us fly, by seeing us become who we were meant to be. That was enough for her. That was everything. He paused, remembering the video, the incomplete sentence, the butterfly in the impossible garden. Carmen left me an unfinished sentence in her final letter. She wrote, "If he wants to honor me, he can," and then she died before finishing it. I thought it was tragic at first, but now I understand. She left it unfinished on purpose. Because how we honor Carmen isn't about following her instructions, and it's about living the lessons she taught us. Louis looked up at the ceiling, at the old wooden beams, at the stained glass windows letting in colored light. So here's what I'm going to do to honor her. I'm establishing the Carmen Rodriguez Foundation. I'm starting it with the £47,000 she left in her estate, plus £1 million of my own money. It will support children from underserved communities pursuing any dream, not just racing, sports, arts, science, anything. Because Carmen believed in potential, but more importantly, she believed in people. Applause broke out, but Louis held up his hand. But that's not enough. Money is easy for me. Carmen's gift wasn't money. It was presence. It was showing up. It was seeing people. So I'm also committing to mentor young people directly, to be present, to show up, to do what Carmen did for me. Believe in someone before they've proven anything. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. And I'm going to use the cottage she built. I'm going to land there when I'm tired. I'm going to rest there when the world is too much. Because Carmen's final lesson was that flying isn't everything. Landing matters too. Being human matters. And love, real love, gives permission for both. Louis folded the photograph carefully and put it back in his pocket. Carmen Rodriguez came to England from Cuba 50 years ago with nothing but hope. She married Eduardo, lost him too young, couldn't have the children she dreamed of. Life didn't give her what she expected. So she gave herself to life instead. To all of us. He looked directly at Winston, at Amira, at Marcus, at all the faces. She was my second mother. But she was your mother too. All of ours. And I think that's how she wanted it. One woman, loving a whole community into being better. One woman, proving that the most important things aren't bought or achieved, but given freely. One meal, one conversation, one belief at a time. Louis's voice broke completely now. I miss her. God, I miss her so much. But I feel her everywhere. In this church, in your faces, in every life she touched and transformed. Carmen didn't leave us. She multiplied herself through all of us, through every person she loved into becoming. He looked at the simple casket at the front of the church, covered in the gardenias and roses Carmen had chosen. Goodbye, Mama Carmen. Thank you for everything. For the empanadas and the belief. For the sacrifices and the freedom. And for teaching me how to fly and how to land. For loving me when I was nobody. And for loving me the same when I became somebody. For proving that one person with an open heart can change the world. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the silent church. Te amo siempre. I love you always. Vuela alto. Fly high. Louis stepped down from the pulpit and walked back to his seat, his body shaking with sobs he couldn't control. People reached out to touch his arm as he passed, offering comfort, sharing grief. Father Michael stood again, his own eyes wet. Thank you, Louis. I think Carmen would be very proud. The service continued. More hymns, final prayers, benediction. But Louis barely heard it. He was thinking about the cottage, about the journals, about the blank wall waiting for whatever came next, and about the incomplete sentence only he could finish. About the butterfly that had landed on impossible blooms. About landing and flying and loving and being loved. When the service ended, people filed out slowly. Many stopped to hug Louis, to thank him, to share one more memory of Carmen. Winston gripped his hand hard. She loved you most of all, you know. Talked about you every day. She loved all of us, Louis said. That's what made her special. Outside, the December afternoon was cold, but clear. The sun broke through clouds, making everything shimmer. Louis stood by the church door, shaking hands, accepting condolences. learning that Carmen's life had been so much larger than he'd ever known. As the crowd finally dispersed, a woman approached him. She was maybe 50, with kind eyes and Carmen's same warm smile. "Mr. Hamilton? I'm Isabella Rodriguez, Carmen's niece from Spain. We spoke on the phone once, years ago." Louis remembered vaguely. "Of course. I'm so sorry for your loss." "And yours." Isabella handed him a small box. "Tia Carmen sent this to me last month. Said to give it to you after the funeral. She said you'd understand what it means." Louis opened the box. Inside was a key, old and ornate, different from the cottage key. Attached was a tag with an address in Spain, Eduardo's village. "I don't understand," Louis said. Isabella smiled through tears. "She bought the house in Spain after all. Last year, a small place near my home. She said it was for you, somewhere to remember where she came from, somewhere to understand her whole story, not just the part that belonged to you." Louis stared at the key, overwhelmed. Carmen had bought both houses. "Mr. Hamilton, every piece of jewelry, Mr. Hamilton. Every piece of jewelry, every family heirloom, everything she'd kept from Cuba. She lived on almost nothing her final year. But she said..." Isabella's voice broke. "She said some dreams are too important to choose between." Louis closed his hand around the key, his chest so full of love and grief he thought he might burst. Carmen had given him everything. Absolutely everything. And all she'd ever asked in return was that he fly. 1 week after the funeral, Louis returned to the cottage on Mariposa Lane. He'd spent the intervening days in London, meeting with lawyers about the foundation, giving interviews about Carmen, and fielding questions from concerned friends and team members about his state of mind. Everyone wanted to know if he was okay, if he'd be ready for the new season, if Carmen's death would affect his performance. Louis had smiled and said the right things, but inside, he felt hollow, unfinished, like there was still something he needed to understand, some final piece of the puzzle that would make everything make sense. Now, driving down the familiar lane toward the cottage, Louis felt the hollowness beginning to fill. The cottage appeared through the bare trees, warm lights glowing in the windows, smoke curling from the chimney. The groundskeepers Carmen had hired were maintaining it perfectly, keeping it alive and ready for him. Louis parked and sat for a moment, just looking. This place Carmen had built, and this sanctuary she'd created from her life savings and her love and her unshakable belief that he needed somewhere to land. He got out of the car, carrying the box of journals from the garden. He'd spent the past week reading them cover to cover, learning the full scope of Carmen's sacrifices. Now he needed to bring them home. This was where they belonged. Inside, the cottage welcomed him with warmth and the lingering scent of lavender. Louis set the journals on the desk in the study, arranging them chronologically. 40 years of Carmen's love, documented in cheap notebooks from corner shops. He made coffee, the Ethiopian blend Carmen had stocked, and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the garden. The butterfly bush was still blooming, those impossible December flowers defying nature itself. Louis pulled Carmen's final letter from his pocket. He'd been carrying it everywhere, reading it over and over, focusing on that incomplete sentence. "If he wants to honor me, he can..." For a week, Louis had been trying to finish it, trying to figure out what Carmen had meant to write, what final instruction she'd wanted to leave. He'd thought of 100 possibilities. Keep racing. Be happy. Help others. Remember me. Live fully. But none of them felt right. None of them captured what Carmen would actually say. Louis walked to the bedroom and stood before the mural, his entire racing career painted in vibrant detail. And at the end, that blank wall. Achievements yet to come. Two unfinished things, the sentence and the wall, both waiting for him to complete them. Louis sat on the edge of the bed, on the letter in his hands, staring at Carmen's shaky handwriting. The pen had trailed off mid-word. She'd been too weak to continue. Death had interrupted her final thought. Or had it? Louis stood abruptly and walked back to the study. He pulled out the final journal, the one from Carmen's last week's. He flipped to the last entry, dated 3 days before her death. November 28, 2024. I'm very weak now. The nurses say it won't be long. I keep trying to finish this letter, but my hands shake too much. If he wants to honor me, he can. The entry ended there, pen trailing off. But as Louis stared at it, something shifted in his perception. He'd been reading this as failure. Carmen too weak to finish. Death stealing her final words. But what if it wasn't failure at all? Louis looked around the cottage, at the restored floral couch, with its impossible blooms. Everything with its impossible blooms. Everything Carmen had done for him had been intentional. Every detail planned. Every moment considered. Would a woman that deliberate, that careful, that purposeful, would she really leave her most important sentence incomplete by accident? Or would she do it on purpose? Louis's breath caught. He understood. Finally, completely, he understood. Carmen hadn't failed to finish the sentence. She'd chosen not to. For 40 years, Carmen had guided him, told him what to do, how to be, what to strive for. She'd given him structure and belief and direction. She'd been his compass, his foundation, his North Star. And her final act, her greatest gift, was to let go. And for him to decide. Time for him to choose, for him to decide. Time for him to choose his own path forward. Time for him to write his own story without her instructions, her guidance, her expectations. The blank wall in the bedroom, the incomplete sentence in her final letter, they were the same gift, given twice to make sure he understood. Permission to write his own ending. Permission to fill in the blanks. Permission to choose his future, carrying her love, but not her expectations. Louis laughed and cried simultaneously, the sound echoing through the empty cottage. He'd been torturing himself for a week, trying to figure out what Carmen wanted him to do. But she didn't want him to do anything specific. She wanted him to choose, to be free, and to finish the sentence in whatever way was true to him. Louis walked to the garden, the letter still in his hand. The afternoon sun was low, painting everything gold. He sat on the bench next to the butterfly bush, feeling the cold stone through his jeans. "You clever woman," he said aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "You left it unfinished on purpose, didn't you?" The butterfly bush swayed in the breeze, and Louis could almost hear Carmen's laugh. That warm, musical sound that had filled his childhood with joy. "Okay, Mama Carmen," Louis said, pulling out his phone. He opened the voice recorder. "Here's my answer. Here's how I finish your sentence." He pressed record. If he wants to honor me, he can live without regret, love without reservation, and give without expecting return, just as I showed him. Louis paused, then continued, his voice growing stronger. He can remember that flying and landing are both necessary, that rest isn't weakness, that being human isn't failure, that love, real love, doesn't measure or keep score or demand perfection. Tears streamed down his face, but his voice remained steady. He can use this cottage you built, can land here when the world asks too much, can be imperfect and tired and scared here without apology, can remember that he matters not for what he wins, but for who he is. Louis looked up at the sky, at clouds moving slowly overhead. He can pass forward what you gave him, can love others the way you loved him, without conditions, without limits, without end. Can see people the way you saw them, not for what they've achieved, but for who they might become. He smiled through his tears. See, and he can fill the blank wall however his life unfolds. More championships or retirement, more racing or new adventures, whatever path feels true. Because you didn't leave it blank to pressure him. You left it blank to free him. Louis stopped recording and played it back, listening to his own voice. Yes, that was right. That captured what Carmen had taught him, what she'd spent 40 years showing him. How to love, how to fly, how to land, how to be human in a world that wanted him to be superhuman, how to give freely, how to rest without guilt, how to measure success not by trophies, but by lives touched and barriers broken and kindness given. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and purples, Louis noticed movement in the garden. Butterflies, dozens of them, appearing from nowhere despite the December cold, despite the impossibility of it. They filled the garden, dancing through the air, landing on the butterfly bush, on the walls, on Louis's shoulders and hands. Bright blue and gold, just like the one he'd seen the day he'd found the journals. Louis knew there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the butterfly bush created its own microclimate. Maybe the groundskeepers had done something special. Maybe it was just an unusual year for butterflies. But he chose to believe something else. Chose to believe that Carmen was here, filling her garden with butterflies because she'd always called him Mi Mariposa, her butterfly. Chose to believe she was telling him she approved, that he'd understood, that he'd finished the sentence correctly, that he was free. "Thank you," Louis whispered, holding out his hand as a butterfly landed on his palm. For everything, for the wings, for the place to rest them, for teaching me they're both necessary, for loving me completely, for letting me go." The butterfly stayed on his palm for a long moment, wings opening and closing slowly. Then it lifted off, joining the others dancing through the golden light. Louis sat on the bench until the sun set completely, until the butterflies gradually disappeared, until the garden was dark except for the light spilling from the cottage windows. Then he stood, brushed off his jeans, and walked inside. He made himself dinner from the food Carmen had arranged, ropa vieja and rice and plantains that tasted exactly like his childhood. He ate at the kitchen table, looking at the Spanish tiles, feeling Carmen's presence in every detail. After dinner, he opened the journal she'd left him, and the blank one, with his name embossed in gold. For the thoughts you can't say out loud. Louis picked up a pen and wrote on the first page, "Dear Mama Carmen, I figured it out. You left that sentence unfinished on purpose, didn't you? You clever, wonderful woman. You spent 40 years guiding me, and your final act was releasing me, telling me it was time to choose my own path, finish my own sentences, write my own story. Here's how I'm finishing it. If he wants to honor me, he can live without regret, love without reservation, and give without expecting return, just as I showed him. That's my answer. That's my promise. I'm using this cottage. I came here today, and I'll keep coming back. You gave me permission to land, and I'm taking it. You gave me permission to be imperfect, and I'm accepting it. You gave me permission to measure my life by love instead of trophies, and I'm trying. The foundation is launching next month. 15 young people will receive their first grants, pursuing dreams in racing, music, science, art. I'm meeting each one personally. I'm going to be for them what you were for me, someone who believes before there's any reason to believe. I'm also going back to racing. The season starts in 2 months, and I'm ready. But I'm different now. I know why I race, not to prove anything anymore, but because I love it, because it's who I am. And I know that when it stops being love and starts being obligation, I'll have the courage to stop. Because you taught me that landing isn't failure. The blank wall in the bedroom, I'm leaving it blank for now. I don't know what comes next. More championships, maybe. Retirement? Eventually. Something else entirely, possibly. But whatever fills that wall will be mine to choose, not anyone else's expectation. You gave me so much, Carmen. More than I knew. More than I can ever repay. The cottage and the journal showed me the full scope of your love, your sacrifices, your belief. I'm overwhelmed by it, humbled by it, forever changed by it. But I understand now that you didn't want repayment. You wanted me to pass it forward, to love others the way you loved me, to give freely, to believe boldly, to help others fly. So that's what I'll do. That's how I honor you. And I'll land here, in this cottage you built, whenever I need to remember who I am beneath the helmet. Who I was when I was just a scared kid eating empanadas in your kitchen. Who I still am, underneath everything else. Thank you for the wings. Thank you for the place to rest them. Thank you for teaching me they're both sacred. Te amo siempre, Mama Carmen. You were my greatest blessing, my miracle, my answered prayer, your butterfly, Louis. He closed the journal and sat for a moment in the quiet cottage, feeling at peace for the first time since he'd gotten the phone call from Mr. Pemberton. Carmen was gone. That would always hurt. But she wasn't really gone. She was in this cottage, in these journals, in the foundation that would bear her name, in every choice Louis made to love without reservation and give without expecting return. She was in the incomplete sentence that had freed him, in the blank wall that waited patiently, in the butterfly bush that bloomed impossibly, in every life she'd touched, including his. Louis walked to the bedroom and looked at the mural one last time before sleep. His entire journey, painted in loving detail, and at the end, that blank space, waiting, not pressuring, not demanding, just waiting, patiently, for whatever came next, for whatever Louis chose to make of his remaining years, for achievements yet to come, whatever those might be. 6 months later, Louis walked through the Monaco paddock before qualifying. The season hadn't gone as planned. Mechanical failures had plagued the car. 2 DNFs already. The championship was slipping away before it had really begun. The media was relentless. Questions about retirement swirled like vultures. Is this Hamilton's last season? Has age finally caught up? Should he step aside for younger drivers? Louis smiled through it all, gave the expected answers, played the role. But inside, something had shifted. The questions that would have devastated him a year ago now just didn't. In his motorhome before qualifying, Louis felt the familiar pre-session anxiety building, the pressure, the expectations, the weight of history and legacy, and being Lewis Hamilton. He closed his eyes and imagined the cottage, the floral couch, the Spanish tiles, the mural with its blank wall. Carmen's voice from the video. Permission to rest, mi amor. Permission to be imperfect. His heart rate slowed, his breathing steadied. Qualifying didn't go well. P7. Disappointing, but not catastrophic. Afterward, facing the press, a young reporter asked, "Are you disappointed with today's result?" Lewis paused, considering the question more carefully than he once would have. "I gave everything I had today. The car had limitations we're working to solve. P7 isn't where I want to be, but it's where we are right now. I'm learning there's a difference between disappointment and failure. Today was disappointing. It wasn't failure." The reporter looked confused, like she'd expected anger or excuses. Lewis smiled. "Someone very important to me taught me that who I am matters more than what I win." Took me a long time to understand what she meant. The race itself was chaotic. Lewis drove cleanly, aggressively, making the most of what the car could give him. He finished fourth. Off the podium, but scoring solid points. A year ago, fourth place would have felt like defeat. Today, it felt like victory. Not because of the position, but because of how he'd driven. Smart, patient, unafraid, but not reckless. In the cool-down room, and the podium finishers talked and laughed. Lewis watched them, feeling oddly detached. Not bitter, just removed. This wasn't his moment today, and that was okay. Back in his motorhome, Lewis opened his phone and looked at a photo he'd saved. The cottage in morning light, butterfly bush blooming impossibly. He'd taken it during his last visit 3 weeks ago. He'd been to the cottage 5 times since Carmen's funeral, sometimes just for an afternoon, once for an entire week between races. Each time, he felt pieces of himself clicking back into place, pieces he'd lost somewhere in the machinery of fame and expectation. The season continued. Some races went well, others didn't. Lewis won in Barcelona, a masterclass in tire management and strategy that reminded everyone why he was a 7-time champion. He finished second in Austria, or third in Britain, but he also had more difficult days. P12 in Canada, when the setup went wrong. Another DNF in Belgium, with a power unit failure. P8 in Hungary, stuck in traffic with no way forward. Through it all, Lewis noticed something strange happening inside him. The losses hurt less. The wins felt sweeter, but not desperate. He was racing because he loved it, not because he needed to prove something. After each difficult weekend, he'd visit the cottage, sometimes alone. Once, he brought his brother Nicholas, sharing stories about Carmen that Nicholas had never heard. Another time, he brought his father, Anthony, who stood in front of the mural with tears streaming down his face. "I never knew," Anthony said. "I never knew how much she sacrificed for you, for us." "She didn't want us to know," Lewis replied. "Well, that's what made it love instead of obligation." The Carmen Rodriguez Foundation awarded its first grants in June. 15 young people from diverse backgrounds, pursuing dreams that seemed impossible to everyone except them. Lewis met each recipient personally. A girl from Pakistan who wanted to race. A boy from Birmingham who wanted to be a ballet dancer. A teenager from Glasgow who wanted to study astrophysics. A young person from Cardiff who wanted to create video games that taught kids about climate change. Lewis sat with each of them, one-on-one, and told them the same thing Carmen had told him. Your gift isn't just your talent. It's proving them all wrong while refusing to become bitter. That's the real victory. One girl, Aisha, the aspiring driver from Pakistan, looked at him with Carmen's same fierce belief. "Do you think I can actually make it? Everyone says it's impossible." Lewis thought about 7-year-old him crying in Carmen's kitchen after being told racing was for rich white kids. "I think impossible is just what people say when they're afraid of what you'll become. Keep going. I believe in you." Aisha's eyes filled with tears, You don't even know me." Carmen didn't know me either when she started believing. She believed first, then got to know me. That's how real belief works. As summer turned to fall, Louis found himself thinking more about the future, about what came after racing, about what would fill the blank wall in the cottage bedroom. The championship was out of reach now. Too many early season problems. He'd finish somewhere in the top 5, respectably, but not first. A year ago, that would have felt like failure. And now, it felt like a season. Just one season in a long career. In September, Louis spent a week at the cottage between races. He wrote in the journal Carmen had left him, filling pages with thoughts he could never say in interviews. "I think I'm ready to start imagining the end. Not yet. I still love racing, still have speed, still have things to prove to myself, if not to others. But the end is visible now on the horizon. Maybe 2 more years, maybe 3. Not because I have to stop, but because I'll be ready to stop." Carmen's gift was teaching me that knowing when to land is as important as knowing how to fly. I'm learning that lesson slowly. Learning to measure my life by more than trophies. Learning that there's honor in walking away when it's time, not clinging until I'm pushed out. And the foundation is becoming what I hoped, a way to pass forward what Carmen gave me. Watching these young people pursue impossible dreams fills me with more joy than any race win this season. Is that a sign? Am I ready for the next chapter? Louis didn't know the answer yet, but he was okay with not knowing. Carmen had taught him that too, to sit with uncertainty without panic, to trust that the right path would become clear when it was time. In October, Louis visited Spain for the first time. He flew to Madrid, then drove 3 hours south to the village where Eduardo Rodriguez had been born, where Carmen had kept a small house, the other half of her impossible dream. The house was tiny. 2 rooms, stone walls, a garden with actual orange trees. Isabella, Carmen's niece, had maintained it since Carmen's death. On the walls, more photographs. Carmen's on the walls, more photographs. Carmen's life before Louis, before England, before widowhood and sacrifice and love given freely to a neighborhood of strangers. Carmen as a young woman in Havana, laughing with friends. Carmen and Eduardo on their wedding day, young and hopeful. Carmen's parents, stern-faced but proud. Carmen in her 20s, looking toward a future she couldn't yet see. Louis sat in the small living room, looking at these photos, understanding Carmen more completely. She'd had a whole life before him. Dreams and hopes and plans. She'd lost her husband young, had come to a foreign country alone, had worked hard jobs for decades, had saved for 40 years for a dream that kept getting deferred. And in the end, she'd spent those savings not on herself, but on Louis, on a cottage in England and a house in Spain, both for him, not for her. Isabella brought Louis coffee and pastries. She came here once, you know, about a year before she died, stayed for a week. It was the only time she'd been back to Spain since she left. What did she do? Walked through the village, visited Eduardo's family graves, sat in this house and cried. Happy tears, she said. She told me, I thought this dream was about coming back, but it was really about making sure Louis understood where I came from, where his mama Carmen was born, in her heart. Louis wiped his eyes. I don't deserve this. Either house. I don't deserve what she gave me. Isabella smiled sadly. Tia Carmen said you'd say that. She told me to tell you. Love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. She chose you. Accept it. Louis spent 3 days in Spain. He walked the village streets Eduardo had walked. He visited the church where Carmen and Eduardo had married 55 years ago. He sat under the orange trees in the garden, eating fruit and thinking about sacrifice and love, and the two houses Carmen had impossibly made real. On the last day, he found a letter tucked into a kitchen drawer, addressed to him in Carmen's handwriting. One more letter, one more message from beyond. Me, Louis, if you're reading this, you've come to Spain. You've seen where I came from. Where Eduardo and I dreamed our young dreams before life took us in unexpected directions. But I bought this house because I wanted you to understand. I had a full life before you. I loved Eduardo. I missed Cuba. I dreamed of coming back here to retire, surrounded by orange trees and Spanish voices. Those dreams mattered. They were real. But you know what? When life changed my dreams, I didn't lose anything. I gained everything. You became my dream, and that dream was bigger and more beautiful than anything I'd imagined for myself. This house exists to show you that choosing you wasn't loss. It was gain. Loving you wasn't sacrifice. It was privilege. Giving you the cottage in England and this house in Spain wasn't about what I gave up. It was about what I got to do. Love someone completely and help them become everything they were meant to be. If someday your dreams change, if the racing ends and new chapters begin, and remember this, changed dreams aren't failed dreams. They're just different dreams. Sometimes better dreams. Dreams you couldn't have imagined until you were ready for them. The blank wall waits for you, mijo. Fill it however your life unfolds. I'll be proud regardless. Con amor eterno. Mama Carmen. Louis folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket alongside the others. He was collecting them now, Carmen's letters, scattered across countries and years, each one revealing another facet of her love. He locked the Spanish house and drove back to Madrid, thinking about dreams and change, and the blank wall waiting patiently in England. The season ended in Abu Dhabi in November. Louis finished fifth in the championship, his worst finish in years, but still respectable, still fast, still competitive. He'd love this. Still have speed. Still have loved this. Still have speed. Still have things I want to achieve. And beyond next year? I'll know when it's time. Carmen taught me that butterflies know when to land. When that time comes, I'll be ready. But not yet. Not yet. Christmas came. Louis spent it at the cottage on Mariposa Lane. Alone by choice, though he'd had offers to spend it with family or friends. He cooked Carmen's recipes, empanadas and ropa vieja and black beans. He ate on the floral couch, watching snow fall outside the windows. He wrote in his journal. He sat in front of the mural, looking at his life painted in loving detail, and at the blank wall that still waited. On Christmas night, Louis stood in the garden under the butterfly bush. Snow covered everything, making the world quiet and clean. The butterfly bush was dormant now, its impossible blooms finally gone with the season. But Louis knew they'd come back. Somehow, impossibly. They always did. "Merry Christmas, Mama Carmen," he said to the sky. "Thank you for the wings. Thank you for the place to rest them. Thank you for teaching me both are sacred." The snow fell softly, coating his shoulders and hair. Louis stood there for a long time, feeling at peace, feeling understood, feeling loved across the distance between life and death. Finally, he went inside, made hot chocolate, and sat by the fire. Outside, the world was dark and cold. Inside the cottage Carmen had built, everything was warm. Louis pulled out his phone and looked at his calendar. So the new season started in 3 months. Testing in February. First race in March. He was ready. Not desperate to prove anything. not afraid of failure, just ready to race, to try, to give his best, to accept whatever came. And when the time came to stop, he'd be ready for that too, because Carmen had taught him how to fly, but more importantly, she'd taught him how to land, and that made all the difference. 2 years after Carmen's death, Lewis Hamilton stood on the podium at the final race of the season, holding the World Championship trophy for the 8th time. The crowd roared, fireworks exploded against the night sky. His team went wild below, jumping and screaming and crying. Cameras captured every angle, broadcasting the moment to millions around the world. But Lewis's mind was elsewhere. During the cool-down lap, before the podium, and before the celebration could begin, Lewis had made an unscheduled radio call that confused his race engineer. "This one's for Carmen," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it, Mama. We did it." "Who's Carmen?" his engineer had asked, bewildered. Lewis had smiled inside his helmet, tears streaming down his face. "The woman who taught me how to win by showing me something more important than winning." Now, on the podium, trophy raised high, Lewis did something unexpected. Instead of the usual champagne celebration and wild cheering, he held the trophy above his head and closed his eyes for a long, silent moment. The broadcast commentators wondered aloud if he was praying. He wasn't praying. He was remembering. Carmen at his first karting race, cheering louder than anyone, her voice cutting through the engine noise. "Vamos! Smijo! Vuela!" Carmen's kitchen, the smell of empanadas and unconditional acceptance, the feeling of being seen and valued before he'd proven anything. Carmen's hands, work-worn and gentle, wiping his tears after rejection and defeat, after racist taunts and cruel comments, telling him his gift was bigger than their small minds. Carmen's voice, steady and certain. "Your gift isn't just speed. It's proving them all wrong while refusing to become bitter. That's the real victory." Carmen's video message, "Permission to rest, mi amor. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to just be." Carmen's incomplete sentence that had taught him to write his own ending. "If he wants to honor me, he can..." Carmen's final gift. 2 houses, one in England and one in Spain, both saying the same thing. You matter not for what you achieve, but for who you are. A Carmen's butterfly bush with its impossible blooms, reminding him that some things defy logic and exist purely because love makes them possible. Lewis opened his eyes, lowered the trophy, and looked directly into the nearest camera. He knew millions were watching. He didn't care. "This one's for you, Mama Carmen," he said clearly. "Thank you for everything. Te amo siempre." The champagne celebration began, but Lewis's heart was quiet. Content? Complete. At the press conference afterward, Lewis deviated from his prepared remarks. The room was packed with journalists, cameras, team personnel. Everyone wanted the sound bite, the quote, the emotional reaction. Lewis cleared his throat and leaned toward the microphone. "Before I answer questions, I need to talk about someone who isn't here today but should be. Her name was Carmen Rodriguez, and she was my childhood nanny. Though that word doesn't begin to capture what she was to me." The room went silent. This wasn't the usual post-championship script. "Carmen passed away 2 years ago," Lewis continued, his voice steady despite the emotion. "She left me a house, a cottage in Hertfordshire that she'd bought with her life savings, money she'd been saving for 40 years for her own retirement home in Spain. She spent it on me instead." Gasps rippled through the room. Other drivers seated nearby, the second and third place finishers, looked moved. One was openly crying. "She also left me journals, dozens of them, documenting my entire life from her perspective. And what I learned from those journals changed everything. Louis pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I wants to honor me, he can. And then she wants to honor me, he can. And then she died before finishing it. His voice cracked slightly, but he continued, For weeks, I tortured myself trying to figure out what she'd meant to write. But then I understood. She left it incomplete on purpose. Because her final gift to me wasn't instruction. It was freedom. Freedom to finish the sentence myself. Freedom to choose my own path forward. Louis unfolded the paper and read what he'd written 2 years ago in Carmen's garden. If he wants to honor me, he can live without regret, love without reservation, and give without expecting return, just as I showed him. He looked up at the room full of reporters and cameras. Yes, that's what I've been trying to do these past 2 years. Carmen taught me that life isn't just about flying. It's about knowing when and how to land. About being human, not superhuman. About measuring success, not by trophies, but by lives touched and love given. Louis gestured to the championship trophy on the table beside him. This is my 8th championship. I'm grateful for it, proud of it, humbled by it. But you know what? It's not the achievement that matters most to me from these past 2 years. A reporter raised a hand to ask a question, but Louis wasn't finished. What matters most is that I kept my promise to Carmen. I used the cottage she built. I went there when I was tired, when I doubted myself, when the pressure felt crushing. I landed there and remembered who I am beneath the helmet. He paused, an emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I also established the Carmen Rodriguez Foundation. In 2 years, we've helped 127 young people pursue impossible dreams. I've met each one personally. I've been for them what Carmen was for me, someone who believes before there's any reason to believe. One of the journalists, an older woman Louis recognized from his early career, was wiping her eyes. Carmen told me in her video message that she was giving me permission to rest, permission to be imperfect, permission to be human. Louis's voice strengthened. And I'm using that permission now to tell you all something I've been thinking about for months. The room seemed to hold its breath. This will be my final season in Formula One. The room erupted. Cameras flashed frantically. Journalists shouted questions. But Louis raised his hand. Please, let me finish. The noise subsided. I'm not retiring because I'm too old or too slow or because I can't compete anymore. This championship proves I can still do this at the highest level. I'm retiring because Carmen taught me that knowing when to land is as important as knowing how to fly. Louis looked directly into the cameras, knowing this moment would be replayed thousands of times. I've been racing since I was 6 years old, 31 years of my life. I've achieved things I never dreamed possible. I've broken barriers. I've won 8 championships. I've proved what Carmen always knew, that a black kid from a council estate could become the greatest. His voice softened. But there's more to life than proving things. There's living, loving, giving back, being present. And I'm ready for that next chapter. I'm ready to fill the blank wall Carmen left for me in the cottage, not with more racing achievements, but with whatever comes next. A reporter called out, "What will you do?" Louis smiled. I don't know exactly. Work full-time with the foundation, mentor young drivers, maybe design, maybe music, maybe things I haven't even imagined yet. Carmen's gift was teaching me that changed dreams aren't failed dreams. They're just different dreams, sometimes better dreams. Another reporter. Any regrets? Only one, Lewis said honestly, that Carmen isn't here to see this. But I choose to believe she's watching somehow, and I hope she's proud. Not of the trophy. She never cared about trophies. I hope she's proud that I learned her lessons, that I'm landing by choice, not by force, that I'm measuring my life by love given, to not just races won. The press conference continued for another hour, but Lewis barely heard the questions. His mind was at the cottage on Mariposa Lane, imagining the blank wall in the bedroom finally being filled. Not with another racing season, but with a new chapter he couldn't quite see yet, but was ready to write. That evening, instead of partying with the team until dawn, Lewis left early. He'd stayed long enough to celebrate properly, to thank everyone who'd made the championship possible, to share the joy. But now, he needed to go somewhere else. He drove to the airport and caught a late flight to London. Then drove north through the dark English countryside, arriving at Upper Willow just as the sun was rising. The cottage appeared through the bare trees, warm and welcoming, lights on because the groundskeepers knew he was coming. Smoke curled from the chimney. The butterfly bush stood tall in the garden, dormant now in December, but strong and healthy, waiting for spring. Lewis parked and sat for a moment, looking at the place Carmen had built for him. His sanctuary, his landing place, his home. He got out carrying the championship trophy. He'd arranged for it to be sent ahead, wanting it here for this moment. Inside, the cottage welcomed him with warmth and the scent of lavender. Lewis set the trophy on the kitchen table and just stared at it for a long moment. 8 championships. 8 times standing on top of the world. 8 times proving everyone wrong. But Carmen had been right. The trophies weren't the point. They never had been. Lewis carried the trophy to the bedroom and placed it on the mantel, among photographs of Carmen, Eduardo, and his own journey. And the trophy looked at home there, not out of place among humble memories, but elevated by them. Then he stood before the mural, his racing career painted in vibrant detail. Every major victory, every significant moment, rendered in colors that caught the morning light. And at the end, that blank wall. Achievements yet to come. Lewis smiled. He knew what would fill it now. Not more racing victories, those were done. But something else. Something Carmen would approve of. He pulled out his phone and called the artist who'd painted the original mural. Left a message asking her to come back. To paint the next chapter. To show him standing not in a race suit, but in regular clothes, surrounded by young people from the foundation. To show him at the cottage, at peace. To show him living, not just achieving. To show him landing. Lewis made himself breakfast, empanadas from the freezer, heated up, still tasting exactly like Carmen's recipe. He ate at the kitchen table, looking out at the garden where he'd discovered her journals, her sacrifices, her immeasurable love. After eating, he walked to the study and opened the journal Carmen had given him. He'd filled nearly half of it over 2 years with thoughts, fears, dreams, and reflections. Now he wrote, "Dear Mama Carmen, we did it. 8 championships. I wish you were here to see it, but I felt you there anyway. I feel you everywhere now, in every choice to rest, every moment of self-compassion, every time I believe in someone before they've proven anything. I announced my retirement today. Next season will be my last. I can almost hear you laughing, saying, 'Finally, and the boy learns to land.' I'm not afraid of what comes next. You taught me that. Taught me that life isn't just about the flying. It's about the whole journey. The taking off, the soaring, and yes, the landing. The foundation is growing. We're helping so many young people now. Kids who remind me of myself at their age, full of impossible dreams and determination. I get to be for them what you were for me. That's the real championship, isn't it? I'm also starting to imagine what I'll do with all this time I'll suddenly have. Maybe I'll spend weeks here at the cottage, just being. Maybe I'll travel to that house in Spain, spend summers under the orange trees. Maybe I'll try new things I've been too busy racing to explore. The blank wall will be filled soon, not with more racing achievements, but with life, with love, with giving back, and with being present, with all the things you valued more than trophies. I finished your sentence, Mama Carmen. If he wants to honor me, he can live without regret, love without reservation, and give without expecting return, just as I showed him. That's my answer. That's my life now. That's what the 8th championship means. Not that I conquered racing again, but that I learned when to stop conquering and start living. Thank you for the wings. Thank you for the place to rest them. Thank you for teaching me they're both sacred. Thank you for loving me completely. When I was nobody, when I became somebody, and every moment in between. You were my greatest blessing, my miracle, my answered prayer. And now I get to be that for others. I get to pass forward what you gave me. That's the real victory. Te amo siempre, Mama Carmen. Always flying, always remembering to land. Your butterfly, Louis. He closed the journal and walked to the window. Outside, the morning sun painted everything gold. The garden Carmen had designed. The butterfly bush that bloomed impossibly. The bench where he'd discovered her final gift. Louis pressed his hand to the cold glass and whispered to the empty room, to the cottage, to whatever part of Carmen still lingered in the walls and tiles and carefully chosen furniture. Thank you for everything. For the empanadas and the belief. For the sacrifices and the freedom. For teaching me how to fly and how to land. For loving me when I was just a scared kid with a dream. For proving that one person with an open heart can change the world. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. For teaching me that championships end, and but love, real love, keeps going. Later that afternoon, Louis walked to the garden. The December cold bit at his face, but he didn't mind. He sat on the bench next to the butterfly bush and looked up at the sky. I did it, Mama Carmen, he said aloud. 8 championships. And you know what? You were right all along. The flying was important, but the landing is what makes it matter. The knowing when to stop. The choosing to step away while I still can. Not when I'm pushed out. A breeze rustled through the dormant bush, and Louis could almost hear Carmen's laugh. That warm, musical sound that had filled his childhood with safety and joy. I'm going to be okay, Louis continued, speaking to the sky, to the cottage, to Carmen's memory. Better than okay. I'm going to be happy. Because you taught me how. Yet you showed me that life isn't measured by trophies, but by love given, and lives touched, and moments of pure, authentic joy. He stood and walked to where he'd buried the journals, now carefully preserved in the cottage study. He touched the stone marker. Para mí, mariposa. I'm landing now, he whispered. Landing by choice, landing with gratitude, landing because you taught me that butterflies need flowers as much as they need wings. As if on cue, though Louis knew it was impossible, knew the season was wrong, knew it defied all logic, a single butterfly appeared. Bright blue and gold, exactly like the ones he'd seen before. It circled his head once, twice, then landed on his shoulder. Louis held perfectly still, barely breathing, as the butterfly rested there. Its wings opened and closed slowly, catching the afternoon light. "I see you," Lewis whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I see you, and I understand. Thank you. For everything. Forever." The butterfly stayed for a long moment, longer than seemed natural, longer than seemed possible. Then it lifted off, dancing through the garden in a spiral of blue and gold before disappearing over the stone wall. Lewis stood alone in the garden, the cold wind drying his tears, his heart so full of love and grief and gratitude that he thought it might burst. Somewhere, in the space between memory and eternity, Carmen Rodriguez smiled. The gift that had changed everything wasn't a house, or money, or even wisdom. It was permission to be fully human, flawed, tired, scared, and still worthy of love. That's what Carmen left Lewis Hamilton in her will. That's what brought him to tears. And that's what made him, finally, free. Free to fly when the moment called for it, and free to land when his heart told him it was time. Both were necessary. Both were sacred. Both were gifts from a woman who'd loved without limit, given without expectation, and believed without condition. Lewis turned back toward the cottage, Carmen's cottage, his sanctuary and his home. He had one more season to race, one more year to fly, and then he would land. Not because he had to, but because Carmen had taught him that knowing when to land was the greatest freedom of all. And in that freedom, in that choice, lay the real championship, the one that lasted forever. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. And if Carmen's story of love and kindness inspired you today, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you help us spread more stories of kindness and compassion to people who need to hear them. Don't let the inspiration stop here. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another incredible story that will move you. Thank you for watching, and remember, love given freely changes everything.